Chapter 823. Oh, isn't this Lao Fu? Don't think about these things now, just keep testing, Anduin said, shaking his head to clear away the unrealistic thoughts clouding his mind. In his opinion, although the ethereal state appeared very powerful, the previous experiment's weak magic attack characteristics indicated that the ethereal state was far from omnipotent. Yes, my lord, Hog responded softly. Let's proceed with the magic defense test next. For safety's sake, we'll start with a basic lightning spell, which consumes minimal energy and has a standard strength of 20 power points. After speaking, Hog began to operate the experimental bench. Soon, the humanoid target in front of Anduin had a hole in its head, exposing the tip of a wand. A very thin electric current shot out from the wand's tip, hitting Anduin directly. Although the electric current was weak and its power extremely low, Anduin still felt a jolt from the impact. How about it, my lord? Can the void armor provide any protection? Hog asked, hesitant to increase the attack's intensity. Anduin shook his head lightly. The response to the attack is very clear and painful. The battle armor, once etherized, is useless and offers no defense at all. Should we continue testing? It seems like you become very fragile in the ethereal state, Hog asked nervously. No need, Anduin replied, shaking his head again. We've conducted similar tests on other subjects before. I just wanted to experience it firsthand. After entering the ethereal form, you indeed become completely defenseless against magic. No matter how strong the protective armor was before, it becomes as if you're entirely exposed when attacked. It seems the flaws of the ethereal form are more significant than its advantages, Hog mused, stroking his chin. My lord, aside from the increased magic sensitivity and vulnerability to magic attacks, do you feel any other special features in the ethereal form? This experience is quite unique, Anduin said, raising his hands to look at his translucent body. After entering the ethereal form, I can clearly feel a closer connection to magic, almost as if there's zero distance between us. Zero distance contact with magic? Hog tilted his head in confusion. What does that mean? Don't we usually have close contact with magic? It's different, Anduin explained slowly. Although magic is stored in a wizard's body, the physical form still creates a gap between the magic and the spirit. This is why magic sensitivity is so crucial for wizards. The stronger the magic sensitivity, the better a wizard can control the magic within. Entering the ethereal state removes the physical barrier, allowing direct communication with magic. I see. Hog nodded in understanding. So, the ethereal form essentially maximizes a wizard's magic sensitivity, which explains the high magic conversion rate. That's one way to look at it, Anduin agreed. And it's not just about casting spells. With the gap between magic and the body gone, magic recovery is also significantly enhanced, even surpassing the recovery rate I achieve in an overloaded state. Isn't that similar to having infinite magic power? Hog asked, knowing how powerful Anduin's overloaded form was. If not for the heavy toll on his body, Anduin could maintain that state for extended periods by absorbing magic on the spot. Unfortunately, the weakness of the ethereal form is too glaring. If you enter this state during battle, you will be defenseless against magic attacks. If you accidentally get hit by a few spells, you might be in serious trouble. After weighing the pros and cons for a long time, Hogg still felt that the magic of the ethereal form should be used cautiously in battle. Although its advantages and disadvantages are clear, the disadvantages can be circumvented or even utilized in certain ways. For example, like this. Anduin smiled coldly, then suddenly closed his eyes and mobilized his magic power. A crystal-clear magic aura began to shine all over his body in the ethereal state. After a moment, Anduin opened his eyes and pointed at the humanoid target in front of him. A ghost-like magic bullet shot out from his fingers, sinking into the target and quickly transforming it into an ethereal form. The next moment, Anduin casually threw a bolt of lightning at the target. Hogg watched in astonishment as the translucent humanoid target was instantly shattered to pieces. Hiss! Hogg sucked in a breath of cold air. So, that's it. Transforming the enemy into the ethereal form can instantly turn them into a defenseless target. Exactly. The application of the ethereal form is more extensive than we initially thought, Anduin nodded with a smile. He had discovered that he could cast spells on other people or objects shortly after becoming familiar with the ethereal form. Hog, let's test the actively transformed data next, Anduin instructed. Yes, Hog replied loudly, raising another humanoid target. After repeated tests, Anduin confirmed that the active transformation of the ethereal form, depending on the amount of magic used, could last from several seconds to several minutes. This was the case for inanimate objects. For living creatures, the duration was significantly shorter, especially if the target was a wizard who could use magic to resist. After being transformed into the ethereal form, the impact on the target was no different from Anduin's current state. This made the application scenarios of the ethereal form more versatile. It could be used on enemies to eliminate their defenses and enhance damage, or cast on allies to grant them physical immunity. The ethereal form is more valuable than I imagined, Anduin nodded in satisfaction. Our next goal is to activate the ethereal form without using the Deathly Hallows. If we can achieve this, we might be able to flexibly and actively cast ethereal energy under normal conditions. Can't you just get rid of the Deathly Hallows and cast a spell through the Void Spirit rune array? Hog asked, puzzled. No, Anduin shook his head regretfully. The Void Spirit rune formation is very special, and it's difficult to cast it out of thin air without the Deathly Hallows as a carrier. It seems that promoting this kind of ethereal form will be challenging, Hog grinned. Then, let's deconstruct the Elder Wand first. We can gradually replace the Deathly Hallows. After all, we have the Resurrection Stone, so there's no need to worry too much. I agree, Anduin approved of Hog's proposal. The core and most special of the three artifacts is actually the Resurrection Stone. Compared to the Elder Wand and the Invisibility Cloak, both have the possibility of substitution. But before that, we have to take this opportunity to do something, Anduin said, exiting the ethereal form. He then took out the magic box containing Tom Riddle's diary from his body. Voldemort? Hog stared at the locket, his expression gradually becoming sinister. Are you sure? Before I personally experienced the ethereal form, Anduin wasn't so sure before, but now. He smiled coldly as he slowly opened the small box. Inside, Voldemort's old diary lay quietly at the bottom. Ever since Anduin had locked it in this box, isolated from all contact with the outside world, Voldemort had fallen into a deep sleep, trying to recharge his energy and bide his time for a comeback. After his last impulsive attempt at suicide, the damage to Voldemort had been significant, and he had not fully recovered. However, Voldemort didn't worry much about this. He never believed Anduin could trap him forever. He boasted of a lifespan comparable to eternal life, and even if he consumed energy, he would eventually kill that bastard. Besides tormenting him with that peculiar type of lightning, Anduin had no other way to deal with him. At worst, the Horcrux would be destroyed, and after the transfer of his soul, he would rise again. When Anduin opened the magic box, Voldemort was still in a state of half-sleep, unaware of the change in his surroundings. Voldemort. Tom? Anduin called softly to the diary twice, but received no response. Oh, it looks like you slept soundly, he sneered, picking up the diary with his right hand, still clad in ethereal armor. He then transformed into his ethereal form again. This time, since he was holding the diary, it was also brought into the ethereal form with him. The magic power required to maintain the ethereal form rose sharply due to the presence of another living creature. Voldemort, who was dozing, felt a sudden chill in his soul and woke up abruptly. You are? Anduin? He stammered, unable to comprehend what was happening. He saw the ghostly humanoid figure in front of him, covered in steel, and could only ask tentatively. Anduin ignored Voldemort. After entering the ethereal state, he seized the moment to analyze the Horcrux with his magic perception. In this state of completely abandoning matter, the soul and spirit were as conspicuous as the moon in the night sky. Only in this state could Anduin break through the Horcrux's protection and directly contact Voldemort's soul. I found you. Legilimency. Activate. After a brief search, Anduin quickly locked onto Voldemort's soul and cast Legilimency without hesitation. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity, where both souls were exposed, to delve into Voldemort's memories. Voldemort's soul trembled as he was hit by Legilimency. As a master of the art, He knew exactly what was happening. He was puzzled, though. How had Anduin activated legilimency on him while he was under the Horcrux's protection? But there was no time to ponder. If he didn't stop Anduin quickly, not only would his memories be exposed, but his thoughts could also be tampered with. A fierce mental battle ensued. Anduin aimed to seize control of Voldemort's mind, while Voldemort fought to maintain his spiritual defenses. If Anduin broke through, the consequences would be disastrous. Fortunately for Voldemort, this was his home turf, and he was a master of legilimency. He managed to hold his ground against Anduin for a while. However, Voldemort was not at his peak. His soul was incomplete, and in terms of absolute strength, he was no match for Anduin. After a prolonged stalemate, Voldemort felt deeply powerless. The gap in mental power between them was significant, and his half-crippled soul couldn't withstand Anduin's relentless assault. Seeing that he was about to be unable to hold on any longer, Voldemort could only grit his teeth in secret hatred. He then erupted with a soul roar of deep resentment. "Anduin, just wait for me. I will never let you go." After yelling and cursing to vent his anger, Voldemort took the drastic step of tearing his own soul and committing suicide in front of Anduin once again. Although consecutive suicides within a year would cause great and indelible damage to his soul, it would at least ensure that his spiritual world would not be lost. Anduin, witnessing this scene, did not show any expression of regret. Instead, he smiled teasingly. He then exited his ethereal form and took out a ring he had cherished for a long time, the ring of the Gaunt family. At that moment, a faint magical halo suddenly lit up on the otherwise simple ring. The ring began to beat slowly, as if it had suddenly come to life. Not long after, Voldemort's consciousness, having committed suicide again, slowly awakened within the ring. This time, he was in an even worse state than after his first suicide. His memory was chaotic, and his soul was so weak that it was extremely difficult for him to function. Before Voldemort, who had just woken up, could react, a large metal face suddenly appeared in front of him. "Huh? Who is this?" Voldemort, whose memory was still in disarray, didn't even recognize Anduin. Subconsciously, however, the figure in front of him instilled an inexplicable sense of fear. Fear? Is there something that I, the mighty Dark Lord, fear? Voldemort couldn't understand why he had such absurd thoughts, but before he could react, the figure in front of him spoke first. "Hey, isn't this Laofu? I didn't expect us to meet again," Anduin said, looking at the ring that now housed Voldemort's consciousness, a weird smile on his face. Without waiting for Voldemort to respond, Anduin activated his ethereal armor once more and entered his ethereal form. This time, he intended to completely and utterly occupy Voldemort's thinking space. End of this chapter. Chapter 824, Voldemort, Why Am I So Unlucky? The sudden change caught Voldemort by surprise. Before he could figure out what was happening, he was once again invaded by Anduin's legilimency. It wasn't that Voldemort didn't want to resist, but having just awakened from the Horcrux, his memory was confused, and he was extremely weak. Just trying to mobilize his mental power to resist caused him sharp pain. In this state, weaker than half disabled, he couldn't even commit suicide again, and could only watch as Anduin's consciousness delved deep into his soul. For someone like Voldemort, Anduin was naturally not very polite. Once his consciousness broke into Voldemort's spiritual world, he rampaged through, roughly flipping through the hidden memory fragments. However, because Voldemort's suicide method had caused great harm to himself, his memory was much more scattered than that of ordinary people. Even Voldemort, a master of legilimency, would have to spend a lot of effort to straighten out his memory, and it would take a long time to recover. In this fragmented spiritual world, it was difficult for Anduin to find the information he wanted immediately. For his follow-up plan, he couldn't waste too much time sorting out these memories slowly, because staying in the thinking world for too long could leave traces. With Voldemort's expertise in thought magic, it wasn't easy to completely hide from him. For this reason, Anduin could only pick the most important information he cared about: the locations of Voldemort's remaining Horcruxes. Since these were the most important memories in Voldemort's mind, they were naturally stored in the deepest part of his thinking space. Anduin didn't spend too much time finding them, But even the conceited Voldemort had added tough mental protection to these memories. Coincidentally, the protective magic Voldemort used was the Slytherin's mental protection technique that Anduin had obtained from the Tefris family. Facing familiar magic, Anduin easily dealt with it and soon obtained the protected secrets. The first Horcrux, Tom Riddle's diary, was stored in the treasury of Malfoy Manor, and Anduin had already acquired it. The second Horcrux, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, was stored in Gaunt's old house, and it was the one he was holding now. The third Horcrux, Salazar Slytherin's locket, was stored in a seaside cave discovered by Voldemort as a child. The fourth Horcrux, Helga Hufflepuff's gold cup, was entrusted to Bellatrix Lestrange for safekeeping and was now in the Gringotts vault. The fifth Horcrux, Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, was kept in the Room of Requirement at Hogwarts Castle. In addition to the 5 existing Horcruxes, Anduin learned from Voldemort's memory that he planned to divide his soul into 7 pieces from the beginning, meaning he intended to make 6 Horcruxes. It seems that Voldemort is not ignorant of the side effects of blindly making Horcruxes, but making 6 is too greedy, Anduin thought, mocking silently. However, his vision in choosing Horcruxes is not low. The Horcruxes he chose were all relics of the founders of Hogwarts. So he originally planned to make Gryffindor's sword into the last Horcrux. And the places where these Horcruxes are stored are quite special. There are caves hidden by black magic, Gringotts, and even one in Hogwarts. But what is this Room of Requirement? On the 8th floor of the castle, opposite the tapestry where the troll beats silly Barnabas, the user concentrates on thinking about the required venue, and after walking past that section of the wall 3 times, a very smooth door will appear on the wall. Is there such a strange place in Hogwarts? Interesting. Satisfied, Anduin withdrew his consciousness from Voldemort's mind. Anduin carefully restored the protective magic around the memory fragments. The information extracted from Voldemort was invaluable, but there was no time to savor it. He had to clean up the scene quickly. After repairing the protective magic, Anduin refocused and returned to the superficial level of Voldemort's thoughts. By this time, the Dark Lord had already lost consciousness due to Anduin's invasive mental assault. Voldemort's misfortune was profound. His life had fallen into Anduin's hands. Anduin, ever the opportunist, was determined to extract every last bit of value from his adversary. Upon returning to the surface level of Voldemort's thoughts, Anduin swiftly collected fragments of Voldemort's recent memories and obliterated all recollections from his second suicide to the present. He also scattered Voldemort's memories of their encounters during the Quirrell period and erased some key details. Finally, Anduin concentrated, condensing a small, obscure piece of spiritual power and attaching it to an inconspicuous memory fragment. With everything in place, Anduin slowly withdrew from Voldemort's mind and unlocked his ethereal form. "How did it go, my lord?" Hog asked with concern as he noticed Anduin returning to his original state. "The necessary information has been obtained, and I've injected positioning magic. Can you try to lock onto him using the magic net background?" Anduin asked, wiping the sweat from his brow after the strenuous task. "Yes, my lord," Hog responded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation. He immediately began operating the equipment on the test bench. After a short while, Hog smiled with satisfaction. "I can receive the location. Voldemort has been included in the tracking system by the magic net." "Excellent," Anduin nodded in satisfaction. "Then we can proceed with the bait plan." Relieved, Anduin placed the ring he was holding on to the operating table and took out a small piece of flammel alloy, crafting something on the spot. After a while, the gaunt ring in front of him had been restored to its original appearance, including the diamond-shaped gemstone. However, the gemstone was now an artificial replica of the Resurrection Stone. Anduin inspected the ring meticulously, ensuring there were no mistakes. Satisfied, he left Hogwarts through a portal, returned to the old gaunt house, and placed the ring back in its original location. He then tidied up the old house to ensure it looked exactly as it had before, erasing all traces of his presence, and returned to Hogwarts with peace of mind. The next day, Voldemort, who was bound to the gaunt ring, slowly regained consciousness. His soul felt heavy, as if someone had violently stirred his brain. It took several hours for him to fully awaken from this dazed state. When he used his senses to survey his surroundings, he was shocked. What's going on? Why am I resurrected in the ancestral ring? Isn't this my second Horcrux? Have I committed suicide twice? Voldemort was horrified. Desperate for answers, he delved into his own thoughts. Unable to remember what had happened before his recovery, he sought answers through a self-examination of his memories. However, upon entering his mind, Voldemort found his memories in utter disarray, as if someone had cast a thunderbolt curse on them. Is the situation this dire? What happened? Even my thoughts have been destroyed to such an extent. Damn it! Who is it? Who is against me? Facing the ruined mental space, Voldemort fell into a fit of impotent rage. At this moment, he didn't even know who the culprit was. However, after venting his frustration, he forced himself to calm down and began to examine his recent memory fragments despite his exhaustion. Due to Anduin's severe destruction before leaving the memory space, Voldemort's short-term memory had suffered significant loss, leaving the remaining fragments extremely fragmented. After patiently sifting through these fragments, Voldemort barely pieced together what had happened. It seemed that he had originally been parasitizing a wizard named Quirrell and had followed him back to Hogwarts to steal the Philosopher's Stone. During this period, something had occurred that exposed his plot, leading him to fall into the hands of an alchemist named Anduin. As for Quirrell and many events that transpired during that time, he had completely lost those memories. After being captured by Anduin, Voldemort had committed suicide for some reason. The only emotional fragments he found from that time were filled with humiliation and anger. Subsequently, through his first Horcrux, he had passed into the hands of a young witch and entered Hogwarts again, only to fall into Anduin's hands once more. Why was he so unlucky? Voldemort finally discovered the reason for his second suicide. It seemed that Anduin was about to use legilimency to break into his mental space, forcing him to commit suicide again. Is it because of that Anduin that I have come to this point? And the reason why my mental temple is so dilapidated is due to the previous confrontation with Anduin? Voldemort gradually cleared his mind, and then his anger surged. Anduin, you and I are sworn enemies. Voldemort roared loudly in his mental world, but soon he froze again. When he uttered this roar, his subconscious mind recalled that this was not the first time he had yelled like this. Realizing this, Voldemort became even more annoyed, and this anger continued to spread and magnify in his mental space until he finally fainted from sheer rage. When Voldemort woke up again, his heart was filled with a sense of desolation. He couldn't figure out where this Anduin had come from or why he was constantly thwarting him. It had even caused him to lose a Horcrux. Each Horcrux represented a part of his soul, so every loss made him weaker. Additionally, every time he cut himself off, his period of weakness would be longer, and such a price was unacceptable to him. Thinking of Horcruxes, Voldemort suddenly remembered something and quickly sank his consciousness into the deepest part of his mental space. After confirming that the mental protection guarding his greatest secret still existed, he breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, so far, I have only lost one Horcrux, but the location I am in now is Gaunt's old house, and this place is still too dangerous. No one knows if that Anduin will follow the clues to find this place. No, I must leave here and regain my strength as soon as possible, Voldemort thought, finally making up his mind. It is too inefficient to act alone. It seems I must take the risk of seeking help from the Death Eaters. Asking for help, in Voldemort's view, was a very risky behavior. He did not want to trust anyone from the bottom of his heart. After all, his condition was too weak, and it was difficult to guarantee whether those former subordinates would have evil intentions. Moreover, showing his weakness in front of his followers would reduce his prestige. So Voldemort had never considered doing this before. But the situation was different now. He had committed suicide twice in a row, and his entire being was almost paralyzed. If he were to recover by absorbing the life force of small animals, as before, can't he wait until the year of the monkey? Among the Death Eaters, Bella is undoubtedly the most loyal to me, but in my memory, the Lestrange family seems to have been wiped out by the Ministry of Magic. She may still be suffering in Azkaban at this time, Voldemort mused. Then who else can I rely on? He pondered further. Lucius? No, my diary left Malfoy Manor inexplicably, and it must have something to do with him. This guy is not trustworthy. Antonin Dolohov or Barty Crouch Jr.? They're supposed to be in the hands of the Ministry, too. Snape? Is that guy still loyal to me? Thinking about his former subordinates, Voldemort suddenly realized that he didn't seem to have anyone available. Those who could guarantee loyalty were all in prison, and he couldn't trust the rest at all. After struggling with distress for a long time, Voldemort suddenly had an idea. Yes, there is him. Although that guy lacks loyalty, he is as cowardly as a mouse. He must not dare to resist my will. With this thought, Voldemort made up his mind. He had no chance to hesitate now. Immediately, he mobilized his remaining magic power, which he had just absorbed, to radiate his consciousness. Soon, with good luck, he found a mouse rummaging through boxes and cabinets in the old house. Without much effort, Voldemort controlled the little mouse, ordering it to dig out the ring that stored his soul. The mouse obediently retrieved the ring and ran towards the house with the ring in its mouth. End of this chapter. Chapter 25, The House of Requirement. After dealing with Voldemort's affairs and concluding his study of the Deathly Hallows, Anduin finally found time to address some other pressing matters. Though seemingly trivial, these tasks were still related to Voldemort and Hirebow. First, when investigating Hirebow, Anduin deduced from available clues that Hirebow's possible location was a small island in northern Russia, possibly within the Arctic Circle. To explore this area, Anduin hired a group of European bounty hunters, equipping them with fear sensors to aid in their investigation. The region was vast, and Anduin had previously searched Lockhart's mind for any useful memories involving the witch, but he only managed to narrow down a rough area. Realizing the difficulty of searching the area himself, Anduin opted to hire others, despite the inherent danger. He made sure to warn the bounty hunters of the risks and offered a substantial reward. The response was positive, with over 10 wizards accepting the mission within days. Anduin could only hope for their success. In addition to following Hirebow's clues, Anduin's primary focus was locating the remaining Horcruxes. His first target was Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, hidden within Hogwarts. Guided by Voldemort's memories, Anduin arrived at the Tapestry of Barnabas on the 8th floor of Hogwarts Castle. Opposite the tapestry was a bare stone wall. Activating his magic sense, Anduin detected nothing unusual. It appeared to be an ordinary wall. Interesting, Anduin mused. If I hadn't seen it in Voldemort's memory, I wouldn't have known there's a hidden room here. How many secrets does Hogwarts hold? Concentrating, Anduin silently repeated, I need a room to store things, while walking past the wall 3 times. On his third pass, a smooth door materialized. Fascinating. This room can transform into any kind of space one desires. Its research value might even surpass that of the Horcruxes, Anduin thought, intrigued. He then pushed the door open and entered. The room was vast, filled with piles of objects resembling countless hills. Most were old furniture and sundries, creating a chaotic scene. Broken wands, contraband, and illegal items made by students were scattered everywhere. Finding a specific item here seemed like searching for a needle in a haystack. Ravenclaw's diadem, come to me, Anduin commanded, using a summoning spell. However, the diadem, possibly due to its unique nature as a Horcrux, did not respond. Not surprising, Anduin muttered. In Voldemort's memory, he placed the diadem on the head of an old, ugly bust. With this clue, Anduin's search became more efficient. Soon, he found the bust from his memory, adorned with an old gray wig and a rusty crown. Disguised to look aged, Voldemort was indeed cautious, Anduin noted with a smirk. He removed the crown and, while holding it, used his magic to gently sweep away the dark rust, revealing a sparkling, gem-encrusted diadem beneath. It is said that wearing Ravenclaw's diadem crown in his hand, pondering its supposed ability to increase the wearer's wisdom. I don't know if it's true, and he muttered to himself. As he stared at the crown, a frown creased his forehead. Are you trying to mess with my thoughts even now? I won't be swayed. Just moments ago, he had felt an inexplicable urge to place the crown on his head. It was clear that the Horcrux was attempting to manipulate his mind. Normally, he would never entertain such an idea. Realizing that the previous sneak attack had failed, Voldemort's soul within the crown launched a direct assault, emitting waves of corrupt spiritual energy in an attempt to overwhelm Anduin's thoughts. Seeing this, Anduin sneered, as expected of a post-production Horcrux. Its strength is clearly a notch above the others, but it's still useless against me. He fortified his mind using occlumency, effectively shielding his thoughts. Soon, the seductive whispers faded from his ears. This fragment of Voldemort's soul has given me an idea, Anduin mused. His crown is a legendary relic of Ravenclaw. Perhaps it shouldn't be destroyed so hastily. He pondered the challenge of destroying the soul within the Horcrux without damaging the crown itself. It's worth a try. Even if I fail, the crown is made of refined mithril. At the very least, I can salvage some high-grade materials. Resolute in his decision, Anduin put the crown away. He wasn't in a rush to leave the room of requirement. Instead, he continued to explore. It took him over 10 minutes to survey the entire room, which was larger than he had anticipated, almost as vast as Newt's magical creature warehouse. The magic and materials required to expand such a space were staggering. The room of requirement was more than just a single room. Intrigued, Anduin exited and walked past the tapestry depicting the troll hitting Barnabas with a stick, contemplating various needs in his mind. A luxurious bedroom, a laboratory for making potions, a potions laboratory with a luxurious bedroom, a luxurious bathroom with hot water, a ceiling adorned with dragon sculptures, a bedroom, a luxurious bathroom, and a potions laboratory. Initially, the room of requirement met his needs perfectly. As he increased his demands, even making peculiar requests like specific decorations or combining multiple room functions, the room adapted. For instance, when he requested a ceiling with dragon sculptures, a luxurious bathroom, a bedroom, and a potions laboratory, the room of requirement combined 3 rooms seamlessly, fulfilling all his specifications. This discovery piqued Anduin's interest further. Where did the items in the room come from? Was the room truly limitless in terms of area and function? To test its limits, Anduin made more extravagant requests. A full-size indoor Quidditch pitch, a luxurious cinema, a shooting range equipped with a full set of Glock series firearms, a garage with a tiger tank, a huge restaurant with 1,000 bottles of butterbeer. After another round of testing, Anduin discovered the Room of Requirement's capabilities were indeed remarkable. The Room of Requirement had its limitations. When Anduin's requests were too extravagant, the room couldn't fully meet them. For instance, he once asked for a full-scale indoor Quidditch pitch. While the Room of Requirement did provide a space that met the standard dimensions, the height was slightly shorter than a real pitch. This indicated that the room had spatial constraints. Additionally, when Anduin made requests that the Room of Requirement couldn't comprehend, the results were often off the mark. For example, he asked for a movie theater but received a traditional theater instead. It was clear that the Room of Requirement didn't understand the concept of a movie theater. There were also requests that were too far beyond the wizarding world's understanding, such as a shooting range with guns or a garage with tanks. In these cases, the Room of Requirement didn't respond at all and simply presented him with a blank wall. When Anduin asked for a restaurant with a variety of drinks, the Room of Requirement did provide a decently sized restaurant, but the drinks were missing. Later, when he tried to request animals or other types of food, the room failed to meet his wishes. This was likely due to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, which states that food cannot be conjured out of thin air. It's not completely beyond my understanding, but the current performance is already quite impressive. What is the principle behind the Room of Requirement? Is it some form of advanced transfiguration, or is there truly magic that can grant wishes? Anduin pondered aloud, standing outside the door of the Room of Requirement, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. He felt certain that the room held more secrets. No matter what kind of magical creation it is, it must be composed of runes and spells, he concluded. Determined to uncover the room's mysteries, Anduin re-entered the Room of Requirement. Ignoring the various furniture and decorations, he skillfully took out a small silver hammer. This innocuous-looking hammer had been instrumental in his exploration of unknown magical creations. It had been upgraded more than a dozen times, and no magical item could hide its runes after being struck by it a few times. Anduin began hammering the floor without hesitation, the sound of metal striking stone echoing through the room. To his surprise, the room of requirement didn't reveal any spells or runes after several minutes of hammering. The room remained as stable as ever, with no visible changes. Is the structure really this stable? Anduin mused. He didn't believe that the room of requirement wasn't made of spells. Rather, this result only proved that the room was more stable than he had imagined. Previously, I had no way to deal with you except by violently destroying part of the room's structure. But now... Anduin smiled and exited the room. He returned to his office and came back wearing his ethereal armor. "Let me see your true nature," Anduin declared, re-entering the room of requirement with a serious expression. He activated his ethereal form and pressed his palms to the ground. Ethereal energy slowly spread from his hands to the floor of the room of requirement. However, the room's structure was even more stable than Anduin had anticipated. Despite using all his strength and pushing his magical output to its peak, the area affected by the ethereal energy remained only a few square meters. Anduin stood in the room of requirement, his eyes scanning the space with a mixture of curiosity and frustration. He had been trying to decipher the secrets of this enigmatic room, but its complexity was proving to be a formidable challenge. Even though he had managed to convert only a few square meters of the room into an ethereal form, it was enough to give him a glimpse of the intricate spells woven into its very foundation. Beneath the translucent floor, a labyrinth of spells was revealed, each one more complex and precise than the last. The dense network of rune nodes and countless magical threads created a dizzying spectacle. Anyone with trypophobia would likely faint at the sight. Unbelievable, Anduin muttered, breaking away from his ethereal form. He couldn't help but curse under his breath. Do they really need to make it this complicated? This place is definitely more than just a simple room of requirement. Despite only a few minutes of observation, Anduin had gleaned significant insights. The spells hidden within the room of requirement were far more intricate than he had anticipated, and their functions were incredibly diverse. Through careful analysis, he identified numerous spell types related to energy storage, magic absorption, protection, and anti-apparition, none of which seemed directly related to the room's primary function. This can't be just a room that responds to needs, Anduin mused aloud. Could it be that this is actually the magical center of Hogwarts, an alchemy room belonging to the school? As he pondered the familiar, complex, and layered rune structures, Anduin's mind raced with possibilities. The room of requirement was clearly more than it appeared, and he was determined to uncover its true purpose. End of this chapter. Chapter 826, 12 Grimmauld Place. It is reasonable to speculate that the Room of Requirement is the core of Hogwarts' magical operations. It is no wonder that the Room of Requirement can fulfill the needs of its entrants. After all, the magic power of the entire Hogwarts is gathered here. With such a supernatural ability, making wishes come true is just a piece of cake. However, what puzzled Anduin was that such a complicated rune structure could not be supported by ordinary building materials. For instance, the alchemy room he built for the Ministry of Magic or other institutions required astronomical amounts of high-grade alchemy materials. But here, Anduin couldn't find any high-grade alchemy materials at all, even through the perspective of ethereal energy. The most basic rocks make up the Room of Requirement. The more he learned, the more Anduin became interested in the Room of Requirement. Now he had a rough understanding of its principles, but the doubts in his mind had not diminished, they had increased. So, in the remaining 2 months of the school year, Anduin would frequently visit the Room of Requirement, using the Void Armor to study its mysteries. During this period, Anduin became more familiar with the energy of the Void Spirit, making it easier to master. This played a significant role in his research and development of a replacement for the Deathly Hallows. With the Flammel Alloy formula and the help of the Sorcerer's Stone, Anduin found a substitute for the Elder Wand within these 2 months. From a functional point of view, the differences between the Deathly Hallows are quite distinct. As the core of the ethereal kit, the Resurrection Stone plays the most crucial role in the transformation of objects, equivalent to the generator of the ethereal form. The Elder Wand amplifies the output of magic power and sorts out the energy of the spirit, acting as a magic power transfer station. The Invisibility Cloak further stabilizes the ethereal energy and channels magic power, ensuring it spreads evenly throughout the user's body. Among the three holy artifacts, the Resurrection Stone is the most critical and the hardest to imitate. In contrast, the Invisibility Cloak and the Elder Wand are not as essential. After investing a lot of resources, Anduin finally created a substitute for the Elder Wand in the Ethereal Kit, a thickened wand wrapped in several layers of flammable alloy. With it, Anduin no longer had to borrow Dumbledore's wand, which had been causing the old man to look at him more and more strangely, as if reminding him not to be so idle. With the substitute, Anduin could control the time of the void armor more freely, giving him more opportunities to study the Room of Requirement. However, due to its complexity, Anduin couldn't fully understand it immediately. The spell circles were layered on top of each other, and he couldn't destroy them, so he could only study them in his spare time. But there wasn't much time left for him and his party to conduct research, as Hogwarts was about to go on summer vacation. This school year had been quite fulfilling for both Anduin and the little wizards, especially in the eyes of the students. This year had been too exciting. They had sweated in various dungeons and experienced the thrilling basilisk crisis at the end of the semester, an unforgettable experience for many. The secret room that once made people talk about it had become a tourist attraction in the school. However, this was a bit hard for Harry. In the last 2 months of school, he had become the door opener in everyone's eyes. Anyone who wanted to visit the secret room had to go through him. Harry's eyes widened in surprise. He had never seen anyone silence the portrait so effectively. "How did you do that?" Harry asked, his voice filled with awe. Anduin smirked. "It's a simple silencing charm, Harry. You just need to know how to apply it properly. Now let's find Sirius." They walked further into the house, the musty smell growing stronger. The house was a labyrinth of dark, narrow corridors and rooms filled with old, dusty furniture. Despite the dilapidated state, there was a certain grandeur to the place, a reminder of the Black family's once prominent status in the wizarding world. As they reached the kitchen, they found Sirius Black sitting at the table, a bottle of fire whiskey in front of him. He looked up as they entered, a broad grin spreading across his face. "Anduin, Harry, good to see you both," Sirius exclaimed, standing up to greet them. "Sirius, it's been too long," Anduin replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I see the house hasn't changed much since I last saw it." Sirius chuckled. "Yeah, it's a bit of a fixer-upper, but it's home. How was your trip?" "Uneventful," Anduin said, glancing around the room. "But we need to talk about Harry's stay here. I have a lot on my plate this summer, and I need to make sure he's in good hands." "Of course," Sirius nodded, his expression turning serious. "Harry's always welcome here. We'll make sure he has a good summer." Harry smiled, feeling a sense of relief. Despite the house's eerie atmosphere, he felt safe with his godfather and Anduin around. "Thank you, Sirius," Anduin said, his tone sincere. "I appreciate it. Now, let's sit down and catch up. There's much to discuss." As they settled around the table, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about the past year, their plans for the future, and the challenges they faced. Despite the dark times, there was a sense of camaraderie and hope in the room. Anduin glanced at Harry, who was listening intently to Sirius's stories. He knew that the boy had been through a lot, but he also saw the strength and resilience in him. With the support of his friends and family, Harry would be ready to face whatever came next. As the evening wore on, the house seemed a little less gloomy, the shadows a little less menacing. Anduin knew that they still had a long way to go, but for now, they were together, and that was enough. At that moment, there was a sound of thump, clink, clink coming from inside the house. Shortly after, Sirius, with disheveled hair and wearing an apron, rushed out holding a spatula. He muttered curses under his breath. "Damn old woman, always haunting the place." When he reached the porch and saw Anduin and Harry, his face lit up with a smile. "It's you two. I was just preparing dinner and didn't even notice you were here." He then glanced at the portrait. "Anduin, you shut up this old guy, right? Well done, I should have invited you over earlier." Anduin rolled his eyes and looked at Sirius's outfit in surprise. Did I hear you right? You're cooking? That's right, Sirius said proudly, flicking the spatula in his hand. He turned to Harry. Harry, tell Anduin how your godfather's cooking is. I learned some new skills from France. Harry's expression froze. It's not bad, at least it's edible. What? Sirius looked at Harry with some dissatisfaction. That's not what you said at Christmas. I remember you were full of praise then, weren't you? Haha, was I? Harry laughed nervously. During Christmas, he had enjoyed his time with Sirius, despite the less-than-ideal living conditions and food. He had been very cooperative to avoid dampening his godfather's spirits. But now, the thought of enduring Sirius's cooking for the next 2 months gave him a headache. Okay, stop embarrassing Harry, Anduin interjected, trying to smooth things over. By the way, didn't you say your family always had a house elf? Why are you cooking yourself? I don't want to talk about Creature. Compared to my annoying mother, his character isn't much better, Sirius grumbled. He just follows my mother's crazy instructions, making the house filthy and his food inedible. Master Sirius is bad-mouthing Creature again. A house elf with wrinkled skin appeared at the end of the porch. It had a bald head with white hairs sprouting from its large bat-like ears, bloodshot gray eyes, and a fleshy nose resembling a pig's snout. Go away, Creature. I'm not in the mood to argue with you. Right now, Sirius yelled, clearly annoyed. Of course, Master Sirius, Creature will not disturb you and your mudblood and wretched friends. I wish you an early reunion with Mistress Walburga. Creature bowed respectfully, but his eyes showed contempt, as if he considered himself superior. After uttering a barrage of vicious curses, Creature retreated from the porch as if he had never been there. It seems the elves in your family aren't very obedient, Anduin remarked, having heard Creature's obscenities. He understood that living in a family that believed in extreme pure-blood supremacy could make someone mean, but it didn't make him feel any better about it. No, he's very obedient, just not in a good way, Sirius replied with a curl of his lips. Enough talk, let's go inside. Sirius led them into the dining room, where the aroma of food wafted from the kitchen. However, beneath the aroma, there was a fishy and greasy smell. Indicating Sirius's lack of talent in cooking, Sirius took off his apron with a resigned sigh. Well, it seems I've been working for nothing all day. The food smells really strange. Actually, you don't need to put yourself through this, Anduin began, trying to offer some comfort. Sirius tried to comfort him. Since you can't trust your own elf, why don't I arrange for another elf to come and take care of you? Isn't that a bit much? Kiki is usually so busy, and hasn't she stopped working as a regular house elf long ago? Sirius instinctively refused. I didn't mean Kiki, Anduin smiled. Recently, I have another house elf under my command. He then looked pointedly at Harry. Do you remember Dobby, the one who always bothered you during the first half of the school year? Yeah, Harry nodded, though he was still confused. That guy made my life miserable. When he disappeared, I thought he had finally come to his senses. Are you saying Dobby is now working for you? Not initially, Anduin shook his head. But I caught him later, on the day you participated in your first Quidditch game. Do you remember? So that's what happened, Harry recalled that day, a hint of resentment in his eyes. He always caused trouble for me. He can't be a good person. Why would you let him work for you? End of this chapter. Chapter 827, Dobby's Nature. Actually, Dobby's nature is not bad, and it is understandable for him to attack you, Anduin explained. Do you remember the black magic item in Ginny's possession that made you all go crazy? Harry nodded, his eyes wide with curiosity. That item was placed on Ginny by Dobby's original master. The reason he tried so hard to drive you out of Hogwarts was to protect you, Anduin continued. What? Harry was startled. So there was such a complicated reason behind it? But why didn't he just tell me directly? He only added to our confusion. The highest law for house elves is to obey their master's orders. They cannot disobey or betray them, Anduin said, shaking his head sadly. For Dobby to act against his master's wishes, he was very brave. That's right, and then you caught him and found out he was tampering with my broomstick, didn't you? Harry finally pieced it together. Yes, Anduin nodded. I caught him and then had his original owner release him from slavery. After that, Dobby started working for Silver Flash Trading Company. Who is his master? Harry asked angrily. Who tried to harm Ginny? You can't just let him go. Don't worry, he is no longer a threat to us, Anduin reassured Harry with a smile. But I can't reveal his identity right now, and I hope you don't press Dobby for answers. All right. Harry nodded, slightly disappointed but understanding. Over the past 2 years, he had matured and learned to think from others' perspectives. He even guessed that Anduin might have a larger plan in mind, as the professor had kept secrets before for the greater good. Being informed in advance was already a sign of trust. Sounds good, but Sirius, who had been listening, couldn't help but smile wryly. I doubt whether Dobby can get along well with Creature. That old elf may not be so friendly to another elf. Then you need to watch out for Creature's safety, Anduin said with a sneer. Dobby has been trained by Kiki for over half a year. It's not wise for anyone to provoke him. Ha ha, then I'm looking forward to it even more, Sirius laughed heartily. Afterwards, Anduin personally cooked dinner and enjoyed a meal with Harry and Sirius. After the meal, Sirius called Harry to pack his things, taking advantage of the alone time to ask Anduin about something that had been on his mind. How is it? Sirius looked around to ensure Creature wasn't nearby. Any news about Peter? Don't be so impatient, Anduin replied, shaking his head. Things are progressing, but Peter's whereabouts are still not confirmed. Then what did you mean by progress in your previous letter? Sirius asked, pacing irritably at the thought of the traitor. I found a breakthrough, Anduin said with a slight smile. Do you remember the Voldemort I mentioned last time? Every time I hear you say his name so casually, I feel inexplicably reassured, Sirius said, shaking his head with a smile. Of course, you said he didn't really die. That's right, and I caught him again this year, Anduin said nonchalantly, as if it were no big deal. Ah? Sirius looked at Anduin blankly. He felt he should be very surprised, but Anduin's casual demeanor made it hard to get excited. Voldemort is not just anyone. How can you talk about him so casually? Then I let him go again, Anduin added. Ah? Do you know what you're saying? Sirius's voice suddenly became high-pitched, his expression incredulous. Surprised by Anduin's statement, Sirius finally exploded. After all, who would let Voldemort go after finally catching him? When you heard such news, you didn't jump up as fast as before. It seems your emotional management has improved a lot, Anduin joked. Don't joke with me. I just couldn't digest the information for a while, Sirius replied, feeling more at ease seeing Anduin's calm demeanor. It's like this. Anduin began, deciding not to tease Sirius further. He briefly recounted his plan from some time ago. So you installed something in Voldemort's mind, and now you're going to use him as bait. Isn't this a bit risky? Sirius was even more surprised after hearing Anduin's plan. He had never seen anyone dare to play with the Dark Lord like this. There are risks, of course. With Voldemort's magical prowess, it's not surprising if he finds the trap I left for him. But this is also an excellent opportunity to wipe out the Death Eaters. Anduin's expression turned cold. I'm not referring to sending them to Azkaban, but... He drew his thumb across his neck in a slicing motion, his eyes filled with murderous intent. You want to kill them all? Sirius was shocked. If you don't get rid of the roots, there will be endless troubles. Anduin lowered his voice. I'm just telling you this. Dumbledore doesn't even know my real plan, so remember to keep it a secret. By cutting grass and roots, do you also mean those who are already in Azkaban? Sirius asked, wide-eyed. Is it necessary to go that far? There are some things that cannot be forgiven. Anduin stared at Sirius intently. I thought you would understand the most. Sirius knew what Anduin was referring to. He didn't expect the young man in front of him to be even more cautious and vengeful than he was. After so many years, Anduin still couldn't let go and wanted to take his anger out on others. Sirius had thought he was the most extreme one. I can understand. After a moment of contemplation, a trace of violence flashed in Sirius's eyes. What should I do? I'll help you. You don't need to do anything, Anduin replied indifferently. Just wait and watch the show. No, Sirius shook his head resolutely. Please accept my help. It may not be important to you, but I also want to do something to atone for my sins. Anduin took a deep look at Sirius, then nodded. Okay, prepare yourself. I'll pick you up tomorrow. The next day, Anduin visited 12 Grimmauld Place early and brought Dobby as promised. Mr. Potter, I'm sorry for doing such an outrageous thing to you before. Dobby knows it was wrong. Dobby, now dressed in a miniature formal suit, apologized proactively when he saw Harry again. Despite his long-term training from Kiki, Dobby still hadn't completely shed his house elf demeanor, his expression full of shyness and restraint. However, compared to other house elves, Dobby had shown remarkable independence, often earning praise from Kiki in front of Anduin. It's okay, just make sure to speak up when you have something to say in the future, and stop casting spells on me, Harry joked, seeing Dobby's new look. Okay, Harry, let's take Dobby to familiarize himself with the house first, Sirius said, showing a welcoming attitude towards Dobby. He then told Harry, I need to go out with Anduin. We might be back later. And, Sirius emphasized, if that guy creature comes out to make trouble, tell him to stay away from me. Don't worry, Mr. Black. Dobby patted his chest confidently. With Dobby here, I won't let anyone disturb Mr. Potter. Hey, even his demeanor has changed after being with Anduin, Sirius remarked. It would be great if creature could be like you, Sirius remarked to Dobby, then followed Anduin out of Grimmauld Place, number 12. Where are we going next? Sirius asked, realizing he had no idea what Anduin had planned for the day. First, let's retrieve Voldemort's remaining 2 Horcruxes and completely cut off his retreat, Anduin replied with a cold smile. He then grabbed Sirius by the shoulder and apparated them away. When they reappeared, they stood at the gates of Gringotts in Diagon Alley. Gringotts? Are you saying Voldemort's Horcrux is here? As far as I know, he didn't have a vault at Gringotts, Sirius said, looking at Anduin in surprise. It surprised me too when I found out, Anduin admitted, leading Sirius inside. You remember your cousin, right? You mean Bella? Sirius had several cousins, including Narcissa, who married Malfoy and became Draco's mother, and Andromeda, who was disowned by the Black family for marrying a Muggle. Her daughter, Nymphadora Tonks, was Anduin's apprentice. But his most infamous cousin was Bellatrix, who married into the Lestrange family and became a fervent follower of Voldemort. Now, the entire Lestrange family was imprisoned in Azkaban. Yes, your cousin is more trusted by Voldemort than I imagined, Anduin said. As a prominent figure in the British wizarding world and a senior partner at Gringotts, he was immediately recognized and greeted by the bank's guards. You mean Voldemort's Horcrux is in Bella's vault? Sirius whispered, understanding dawning on him. If that's the case, why are we entering Gringotts so openly? Shouldn't we sneak in under the cover of darkness? Infiltrate? Why would we need to do that? Anduin asked, surprised. How else are we supposed to get into Bella's vault without sneaking in? Sirius asked, his expression turning furtive. Gringotts is the most heavily guarded place in the wizarding world. I know exactly how tight the security is here. The defense system was designed with the help of Silver Flash Trading Company. Even 10 more intruders like you wouldn't stand a chance, Anduin laughed. Isn't that perfect? Sirius suggested mischievously. Since you're familiar with the security, doesn't that give us a better chance? Why do you always think like a thief? Are you suggesting we bypass the security system I helped create? Anduin rolled his eyes. He couldn't help but recall how his family had pulled off a similar stunt at Ilvermorny School in the United States a few months ago. Let's just go in and get it ourselves. No need to complicate things. Just go in and get it? Do you think this is your home? Sirius exclaimed, thinking Anduin had lost his mind. Do you really think the goblins will agree to such an outrageous request? In Sirius's experience, goblins, especially those at Gringotts, were not only distrustful of human wizards, but also extremely stubborn. How could these proud creatures allow someone to break their rules? That's where you're wrong, Anduin grinned. In the wizarding world, there's no creature easier to deal with than goblins. They're more straightforward than many people think. They're simply greedy for money. As for rules, they're meant to be broken, as long as you can pay the right price. As they entered the lobby of Gringotts, a goblin supervisor at the counter brightened upon seeing Anduin. Mr. Wilson, what a rare pleasure. If you have any needs, you only need to send a letter through Silver Flash Trading Company, the goblin supervisor said, smiling obsequiously. As one of the wealthiest men in the wizarding world, Anduin was a top-tier VIP at Gringotts. They had even created a special fast-track service just for him. No matter what the business is, As long as you give the word, someone will handle it. I'm here today for a private matter, Anduin said, not wasting any time on unnecessary pleasantries. He gave the goblin supervisor a subtle wink. Understood. Please follow me, the goblin supervisor responded with a knowing nod. He then led Anduin and Sirius around the lobby and into a luxuriously decorated living room. Sirius couldn't help but be amazed by the scene. It was the first time he had seen a goblin show such respect to a human. Additionally, he had never known that Gringotts had such a private parlor. Back when he was with the Black family, they had always had to wait in line in the lobby to withdraw money. End of this chapter. Chapter 828, A Delicate Negotiation. After inviting Anduin and Sirius to sit in the reception room, the goblin supervisor warmly brought a tray of assorted drinks to the two of them. With a smile, he asked, Mr. Wilson, if you need help, please ask. Gringotts will do its best to serve you. I want to retrieve something from a vault, Anduin replied politely. Retrieve something? The head goblin frowned in confusion. Does this man need to come in person for such a task? Others may not know it, but the goblin manager was well aware that, despite Anduin's stature, the Silver Flash Trading Company's treasury didn't hold much. Gringotts valued Yinshi Trading Company as its largest customer, not for its vault contents, but for its cooperation in security systems and cross-border trade. The monthly inflow and outflow through Gringotts alone reached tens of thousands of galleons, with Silver Flash Trading Company supporting nearly half of their business. So when the goblin supervisor heard that Anduin wanted to fetch something, he immediately became suspicious. Your Excellency Wilson, you're not referring to your own treasury, are you? He asked tentatively. You're smart, Anduin replied without hesitation. Clever indeed, but there's nothing but air in your coffers, the goblin supervisor thought, restraining himself from rolling his eyes. Instead, he showed an embarrassed expression. Your Excellency Wilson, you should be aware of our Gringotts regulations. Our existence is to protect the safety of our customers' property. This kind of request is somewhat illegal. After hearing the goblin director's polite refusal, Sirius, sitting nearby, showed an expression of understanding. He knew this wouldn't work and thought it might be better to sneak in at night. He gave Anduin a cold look, curious to see how he would handle the situation. Anduin just smiled slightly. I understand, which is why I informed you in advance. If I can get help from Gringotts, I would be very grateful. The goblin in charge's eyes lit up, sensing a subtext. Is this item very important to you? He asked tentatively. Yes, very important, Anduin nodded seriously. Do you mind if I know in advance whose vault it is? The goblin supervisor asked cautiously. Bellatrix Lestrange, Anduin said flatly. Bellatrix Lestrange? The Lestrange family that was captured and imprisoned in Azkaban? The goblin director's tense expression suddenly eased upon hearing the name. You are well informed, even about someone who has been gone for more than 10 years. Anduin praised the goblin, subtly reminding him of something. So it's the Lestrange family that has been absent for over a decade? The goblin supervisor nodded secretly. Gringotts recorded all customer information in great detail. He remembered that all members of this family had been imprisoned, with no living relatives outside. From a certain perspective, the vault was essentially ownerless. However, according to Gringotts regulations, even if the original owner and heirs couldn't be contacted, the vault had to be kept for at least 100 years. Some vaults were kept even longer, considering the long lifespans of some wizards who might disappear for decades and then reappear. But the Lestrange family had been sentenced to life in Azkaban, so there seemed to be some room for negotiation. The goblin supervisor was overjoyed at the prospect of making some money from Anduin. After all, it was a rare opportunity. Not that Gringotts hasn't done this kind of thing before. They were able to accumulate so much wealth, in fact, by creating relic wealth. It's just that they were more cautious in choosing targets in the past, often waiting for hundreds of years after the owner of the vault disappeared. As for now, the risk might be worth it. Even though he had made up his mind, the goblin supervisor still showed an embarrassed expression and quietly moved to Anduin's side. Your Excellency Wilson, it's not that I don't want to help, but the risk of doing this kind of thing is too great. If something happens, not only will I lose my job, but Gringotts may also be implicated. Hearing that the goblin in front of him didn't directly refuse but instead complained, Anduin understood what the other party was thinking. I know this is very difficult, so to compensate you, I can offer this amount. Anduin spread out his right hand to show 5 fingers and smiled persuasively. Of course, I know you may not care about money, so I plan to open a highest-level vault in Gringotts in the name of Silver Flash Trading Company, and the performance will be in your name. How about it? 5,000. The goblin supervisor's eyes widened excitedly after seeing Anduin's gesture, and he asked to confirm. Seeing this, Anduin nodded with a smile. It was better to spend money to avoid trouble than to sneak in and steal at the risk of ruining his reputation. All right. After hearing Anduin's offer, the goblin supervisor immediately agreed without hesitation. You take a break here, and I will arrange it for you. Of course, on the way down later, don't say that you're going to pick up things, but that you are going to visit the vault you just bought. No problem. After entering the vault, my thank you gift will be delivered immediately. To ensure the goblin behaved honestly, Anduin added a special note. The goblin supervisor almost laughed out loud and walked out briskly, as if he was about to fly. Sirius, standing next to Anduin, looked dumbfounded, having witnessed such a shady deal. He didn't fully react until the goblin left the room. Is it really like this? Sirius couldn't help but complain. Aren't the goblins in Gringotts always known for their honesty? Who told you that? Anduin rolled his eyes. They are famous for being greedy for money. As long as the price is right, these guys can even sell their souls. Of course, if you insist on saying that, it's true. Didn't they write clearly at the entrance, anyone who dares to steal from the treasury will be punished? These goblins have a strong belief in punishing thieves. Sirius didn't know what to say for a moment. After waiting for more than half an hour, when the two walked out of the gate of Gringotts, Anduin already had an extra beautiful golden cup in his hand. But Sirius still had a confused expression on his face. He really didn't expect that Voldemort's Horcrux could be obtained so easily. Don't be in a daze! Anduin put away the golden cup and placed his hand on Sirius's shoulder again. The next task is ahead, but this journey is longer, so be careful not to vomit. With that, Anduin activated Apparition, and when they reappeared, they were at the foot of a majestic seaside cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, a small and hidden cave could be vaguely seen. For some reason, despite it being summer, a gloomy wind blew along the coast, and the temperature in a radius of more than 10 miles dropped several degrees inexplicably. Is this the place where Voldemort stored another Horcrux? Sirius asked loudly while standing on a scorched rock by the sea, pointing to the cave in the distance. Yes, Anduin nodded. I don't know if you have noticed, but there are a lot of expulsion and confusion spells cast here. Anduin said, We need to wait a little while as I remove these spells one by one. He then dropped Sirius, drew his wand, and pointed it at the air in front of him. After a moment, he turned back to Sirius. Let's go. Let's move closer. Without waiting for Sirius' response, Anduin pulled him towards the cave. As they approached, they saw that the entrance was sealed by a faint magical shield. Sirius attempted to cast a breaking spell, but it had no effect. It seems the protection here is much stronger than we anticipated. Are you sure you know how to open it? Sirius asked, feeling the faint pressure emanating from the barrier. This place is protected by blood magic, Anduin explained calmly. It requires a blood sacrifice, and the person who enters must pay a weakening price. Only one person can enter at a time. Then let me do it, Sirius offered, extending his left hand. Use my blood, and then you can go in without being weakened. There's no need for that, Anduin replied with a smile. Have you forgotten what I do? We don't have to follow Voldemort's rules. He then took out the Void Spirit armor and entered the Void Spirit form. Pressing one hand against the barrier, he let his magic power flow into it, modifying the rune structure. Since mastering the ethereal form, Anduin's efficiency in dealing with spells and alchemical creations had more than doubled, allowing him to work on the spot. Sirius, seeing this ghost-like state for the first time, was momentarily stunned and speechless. After a while, Anduin's body slowly turned from ethereal to solid. He smiled proudly at Sirius. All right, let's go in. He pointed his wand at the cave entrance, and soon a passage wide enough for 2 people appeared. "Did you just become a ghost?" Sirius asked, following Anduin. "It's somewhat similar," Anduin replied without looking back. "It's a type of magic I recently discovered that enhances my control over magic." He guessed that Sirius wouldn't understand the complex magical theory behind it. Sirius was indeed confused, but was quickly distracted by the scene before them. They stood on the shore of a vast black lake, so wide that the far shore was invisible. In the middle of the lake, a dim green light shone, reflecting off the dead water below. Apart from the green light and the glow from their wands, the area was enveloped in thick darkness, denser and more oppressive than normal. "What kind of place is this? How is there a lake inside a cave, and why can't we see anything?" Sirius shivered from the cold air emanating from the lake. "Be careful, this place is more dangerous than it seems," Anduin warned. He could sense a thick aura of dark magic emanating from the lake's surface and depths, and the surrounding darkness was deeply unsettling. Anduin took out a dozen crystal-like objects and threw them into the air. The crystals floated as if held by an invisible force, projecting bright but not blinding white light. Instantly, the entire lake was illuminated, revealing the surroundings. In the center of the lake was a small rocky island, and a small boat was fixed to the rock wall not far from them. At the same time, Sirius peered through the lake water and saw that the bottom was littered with pale corpses, which looked even more terrifying under the strong light. "It seems the Horcrux should be in the center of the lake," Sirius said, looking away and swallowing hard before speaking to Anduin. "Yeah," Anduin nodded. "Let's go and have a look at the boat." The two approached the small boat and discovered it was enchanted, seemingly designed to carry only one person across the lake. Faced with this situation, Sirius didn't display his usual bravado. Instead, he turned to Anduin, knowing his companion might have another solution. Sure enough, Anduin didn't say a word. He calmly transformed into an ethereal form and gestured for Sirius to stand on the boat. "Your strange magic is quite convenient," Sirius remarked, understanding Anduin's method. By turning himself into a half-spirit state, Anduin was no longer considered a human. After the two of them got on the boat, it determined they hadn't violated the rules and carried them to the center of the lake. Upon reaching the small rocky island, they discovered a stone basin filled with potions. At the bottom of the basin lay a simple, unadorned locket. "Sorry for the late post today. I just saw the title and it was a bit upbeat, and it will be even more upbeat after seeing the results." End of this chapter. Chapter 829, The Last Horcrux. Is this Voldemort's last Horcrux? Sirius circled the stone basin twice, carefully inspecting the locket. He was cautious, knowing the dangers associated with Voldemort's dark magic. He didn't dare to act rashly, aware that his interference could cause more harm than good. "That's right, this is Slytherin's locket. Now we have to find a way to get it out," Anduin said, his eyes shining with a light silver brilliance as he examined the stone basin's secrets. "Do you have any clues?" Sirius asked, confident in Anduin's abilities. Despite the stressful infiltration environment, he remained calm. "According to my analysis, the Horcrux can only be revealed by drinking all the potion in the stone basin," Anduin explained, pointing to the shells used to scoop water beside the basin. "Can't you just pour the potion out?" Sirius picked up a shell and scooped up some potion, attempting to splash it out. However, even after scooping 5 or 6 spoonfuls, the potion level didn't decrease. He couldn't put his hand into the water, and spells like the Disappearing Charm and Transfiguration had no effect. "As you can see," Anduin shrugged, "these potions are enchanted with powerful magic. They can only be reduced by being drunk. And I don't know much about the effects of these potions before trying them. After all, I'm not an expert in potions," Anduin admitted. Sirius nodded, then looked at Anduin expectantly, hoping he had another solution. Anduin smiled wryly. "Don't look at me like that. The magic Voldemort used on this stone basin is much more complex than the entrance. If we want to use alchemy to crack it, it would take several days of work." "Then why don't you just tell me to drink it?" Sirius rolled his eyes, scooping up a cup of potion and bringing it to his mouth. But Anduin suddenly stopped him. "Wait a minute, I think I have a better idea." He took out a random door, opened it and looked inside. Smiling, he said, "Good luck. Although apparition is prohibited here, it doesn't affect the random door. Wait a moment." Anduin walked through the door without looking back. After a while, he reappeared with another figure. "This is Lockhart?" Sirius carefully identified the figure. After a moment, he confirmed it was the famous writer who had been in the newspapers some time ago. However, Lockhart's current appearance was far from his previous high-spirited state. He wore a clean hospital gown, his face haggard, and his expression filled with lingering panic. "Mr. Wilson, what do you want from me?" Lockhart pleaded with Anduin, his face mournful. "I've done everything you asked, including those weird experiments. Please let me go, even if it means sending me to Azkaban." During his imprisonment by Anduin, Lockhart had experienced daily horrors. He was forced to consume tasteless nutrient solutions and became the subject of bizarre experiments. The worst part was that it wasn't Anduin conducting the experiments, but Hog, the foul-mouthed dog. Lockhart had learned hundreds of swear words from Hog, who berated him daily without repetition. "Don't worry," Anduin said kindly. "I brought you here to give you a chance. If you help me with this task, I'll send you to Azkaban." "Good, good, good." Lockhart nodded eagerly, desperate for any escape from his current torment. Anduin's words hung in the air, as if he would regret them later. "Tell me, and I will do my best," he said. Lockhart's eager expression was almost ghostly, leaving Sirius bewildered. Was this guy out of his mind? Anduin was talking about sending him to prison, yet Lockhart seemed not only unafraid, but also excited. Neither Anduin nor Lockhart bothered to explain the situation to Sirius. Anduin simply pointed to a stone basin nearby. "Drink these potions," he instructed. Without hesitation, Lockhart rushed to the stone basin, scooped up the potion with a shell, and poured it into his mouth. To an outsider, it might have looked like he was savoring a delicious drink. But as soon as the potion touched his lips, he collapsed against the basin in agony, his face turning a sickly shade of blue. Fear contorted his features. "It's so hot! I feel like my internal organs are burning," Lockhart cried out, drenched in sweat. Horrifying visions filled his mind. Ferocious ghosts and dragons with bloody maws seemed ready to devour him. "Drink it all, or you'll find out what happens," Anduin's voice whispered in his ear, like a devil's command. The words jolted Lockhart awake. In his mind, the terror of Anduin far outweighed the horrors he was experiencing. Driven by fear, he forced himself to drink the potion, one agonizing gulp at a time. Sirius watched in shock, trembling. How strong was this man's willpower to endure such torment? Finally, when the last drop was consumed, Lockhart collapsed, writhing in pain and clawing at his throat. "Water! Water! I'm dying of thirst!" he gasped. Sirius, unable to bear the sight, quickly conjured a basin of clear water and helped Lockhart to the edge. But no matter how desperately Lockhart tried to drink, the water remained elusive, like a mirage. In a final act of desperation, Lockhart lunged towards the nearby lake, hoping to quench his thirst. But Anduin grabbed his belt, halting his movement. "Anduin, just give him some water. He's suffering," Sirius pleaded. "No," Anduin replied firmly. "This lake is cursed with dark magic. Disturbing the water will trigger a trap set by Voldemort. The corpses beneath the surface will rise. While I can handle them, there's no need to invite trouble." "And what about him?" Sirius gestured to the pitiful Lockhart. "He looks like he's dying of thirst." "Let's go back," Anduin said, pulling Sirius and Lockhart through a portal. In the safety of a cave, the enchantment that turned liquid into an illusion dissipated. Sirius easily conjured a puddle of clear water, and Lockhart's condition began to stabilize. "Mr. Wilson, I followed your instructions exactly. Now," Lockhart began, his eyes burning with anticipation. "Don't worry," Anduin assured him. "I keep my promises. I'll arrange for the Ministry of Magic to borrow you later." He paused, his expression turning serious, as he leaned in to whisper in Lockhart's ear. "After entering Azkaban, you have to. Do me one last favor." His voice grew fainter, and Lockhart's expression turned to one of astonishment as he listened. "You? Me? Them?" Lockhart pointed at himself in confusion. "Can I really do this alone, or in that kind of place?" "I believe in you," Anduin reassured him, squeezing Lockhart's shoulders with a smile and a slight pressure from his fingertips. "And if you can't do it, you must. You know me, and I can get you out of Azkaban any time." Anduin's threatening words made Lockhart, who had just escaped from pain, break out in a cold sweat again. "Of course, if you complete the task I entrusted to you," Anduin continued, softening his tone, "I might find a way to help clear your name, or at least reduce your sentence. You don't want to spend your life in prison, do you?" "Huh?" Lockhart grimaced. "With the crimes I've committed, I won't be imprisoned for life, right?" "I said yes, and you will," Anduin replied coldly. All right." Lockhart struggled internally for a long time before finally gritting his teeth and agreeing. He was desperate and could only hope that Anduin would keep his word. In their past interactions, Anduin had been honest, albeit with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. After finishing the conversation, Anduin sent Lockhart to rest. He needed to recover some vitality. It wouldn't do for the Ministry of Magic to see him in such a state. "What did you just say to him?" Sirius asked curiously. "Why does Lockhart look like he's about to die heroically?" "Secret," Anduin grinned. "I'm sorry, this matter has to be kept a secret for now, even from you." "Okay," Sirius shrugged, trusting Anduin completely. "By the way, hand over the locket to me. Voldemort's Horcruxes contain strong dark magic that can interfere with a wizard's thoughts. Don't let it control you," Anduin said, suddenly remembering the locket in Sirius's hand. "Dark magic? I don't feel anything. It seems like an ordinary metal box," Sirius muttered as he handed over the locket. "With Voldemort's ability, he would naturally make it so you don't feel any disobedience," Anduin explained casually. But after taking the locket, he frowned slightly. I can't feel any dark magic. Is this Horcrux more sophisticated than the others?" "No, this is Voldemort's third Horcrux. The last one, Ravenclaw's diadem, felt wrong immediately." Anduin was puzzled and hesitantly opened the locket. Why is there a note in here? Could this note be Voldemort's Horcrux?" Sirius, curious as ever, interrupted. "No, this locket is not a Horcrux at all." After opening the locket, Anduin confirmed his suspicion. "It wasn't even an alchemical tool. It's not a Horcrux? Have we been deceived? Who told you where Voldemort hid the Horcrux?" Sirius's face darkened at the news. "Impossible. This place is absolutely correct." Anduin shook his head resolutely. This was Voldemort's memory. It couldn't lie to him. "Don't worry about it. Let's read what is written on the note." Anduin unfolded the note left in the locket. "To the Dark Lord, I am dead long before you read this. But I want you to know that I discovered your secret. I stole the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as possible. I am willing to die in the hope that you will be killed when you meet your opponent. R.A.B. It seems someone got here before us." Anduin raised his eyebrows in surprise. "But who is this Rab? He actually knows the secret of Voldemort's Horcrux." Anduin pondered deeply, but no answer came to him. When he finally looked up, he noticed Sirius staring at the note in his hand, his face a mask of shock. "Sirius, do you know who this Rab is?" Anduin asked, sensing that something was amiss. "Rab," Sirius whispered, closing his eyes in pain. "Rab is the abbreviation of my brother Regulus. He used to call himself that since he was very young. You could find those initials on his door and in his textbooks." "Your brother?" Anduin was taken aback. He glanced at the note again, the realization dawning on him. If this note was indeed left by Sirius's younger brother, did it mean that Regulus was no longer alive? End of this chapter. Chapter 830, Finding Regulus. Don't be so quick to judge. Rab is such an ordinary code name. It could represent someone else, Anduin said, sensing the deep sadness in Sirius and trying to comfort him. No, Sirius couldn't control his emotions any longer. Tears streamed down his face. "It's not just the code name. The handwriting on the note is familiar to me. It's Regulus' handwriting. He left the note. It is Regulus." "I'm sorry. Please forgive me," Anduin said, his emotions conflicted. He was relieved to have found the person who left the note, but felt sorrow for Sirius, who had lost his loved one. "No, I knew he was gone a long time ago," Sirius said, shaking his head lightly, his voice trembling. "But back then, apart from a little regret, I wasn't particularly sad. From a very young age, Regulus adored Voldemort and dreamed of becoming a Death Eater. At the time, I hated all of them. My parents were obsessed with pure blood. They believed that being a member of the Black family was inherently noble. My brother was too weak to resist their beliefs. He was younger than me, and people kept reminding me that he was much stronger than I was." Regulus joined the Death Eaters as he wished, but after a few years, we received news of his death under mysterious circumstances. I suspected then that he was killed by Voldemort, or more likely, under Voldemort's orders. Regulus wasn't important enough for Voldemort to kill him personally. From what I've read since his death, he got in too deep and became terrified of what he was being asked to do. He wanted to quit, but you can't just hand in a resignation letter to Voldemort. It's either your life or your death. For a long time, I only felt a little sorry for his death. Sometimes I even thought it was absurd, but I never expected. Sirius looked at the note in Anduin's hand with pain in his eyes. I never expected that Regulus not only turned against Voldemort, but was willing to give his life to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes. I blamed him wrongly. Compared to Regulus, I am truly useless. Sirius's eyes were red with emotion, and he seemed to lose all his strength, collapsing to the ground in pain. Anduin, standing beside him, was speechless after hearing Regulus's past. From the current perspective, Regulus had shown immense courage by awakening and taking action against Voldemort. Indeed, in every era, there are warriors dedicated to justice. After a moment of reflection, Anduin had a sudden realization. Since Regulus stole the Horcrux from the cave, where was the real Horcrux now? According to Sirius, Regulus should have died before Voldemort's disappearance, likely in the cave. With the traps in the cave, it would have been impossible for anyone to escape alone without significant strength. Moreover, apparition was prohibited in the cave, and the boat's restrictions meant another person must have taken the Horcrux away. The only person who could have acted with Regulus was... Anduin's eyes suddenly brightened. Sirius, don't be sad. Let's get Regulus back. Get him back? Sirius asked, slightly taken aback, his eyes still red. Then he realized, you mean those inferi at the bottom of the lake? Anduin nodded. Exactly. The cause of Regulus's death was unknown back then. If he had escaped from the cave, you, as his close relative, would have known, so I believe that cave is where Regulus died. He died in the cave? Sirius hesitated. If that's the case, where is the real Horcrux? Did it also sink into the lake? No, I guess someone must have helped Regulus take away the Horcrux, Anduin said, narrowing his eyes slightly. I remember you told me before that Kreacher was very loyal to your brother, right? After being reminded by Anduin, Sirius's eyes widened in realization. You mean Regulus stole the Horcrux with Kreacher's help? Otherwise, it's hard to explain how Regulus managed to obtain the true Horcrux. Could he really have done it alone back then? Anduin mused. Although he wouldn't underestimate anyone, it seemed too difficult for Regulus, who was probably under 20 at the time. Although I don't want to admit it, what you said makes sense. Sirius nodded, his expression turning grim. But why did that trash creature leave my brother alone? How could he retreat completely? The magic of house elves is different from that of wizards. While wizards' apparition can be blocked in caves, it doesn't affect house elves, Anduin explained. As for why Regulus was left there, we can only ask the person involved back then. But the most important thing now is to make sure that Regulus is really at the bottom of the lake, Anduin said, pointing to a door behind him. Let's go and bring your brother back. Sirius nodded solemnly and resolutely stepped through the door. After returning to the cave, Anduin didn't waste any time. He stomped on the ground, causing ripples to spread across the lake. Black. Anduin glanced at Sirius. I will control all the corpses. You focus on finding Regulus. Before Anduin could finish speaking, the lake around them began to boil. Overwhelming numbers of living corpses crawled out of the water, rushing towards them like waves. Sirius, taken aback by the scene, couldn't afford to be sad anymore. You mean you want to control all the corpses? Are you sure? Sirius asked, clearly alarmed. Don't worry, just don't forget your mission, Anduin replied with a slight smile. He then took out a green scepter as tall as a person, slammed it on the ground, and shouted, Dominate the undead. A dazzling dark green aura immediately bloomed from the scepter, and a faint ripple spread around it. Dealing with black magic creations like these corpses might be a struggle for others, but for Anduin, it was as easy as drinking soup. He had been in contact with yin corpses many years ago and had learned many methods of manipulating them from the silver spear. He had specially made this death-controlling staff for research on living corpses, but it was proving to be of great use here. As expected, after Anduin activated the scepter, the corpses emerging from the water immediately stood still, as if bound by a spell. Under Anduin's control, they slowly walked out of the water and lined up in an orderly manner, passing in front of Sirius one by one. Sirius was stunned by the sight. Who would have thought that the army of corpses, which had seemed like an overwhelming tide of undead, would become so docile at Anduin's command? Hurry up, it takes a lot of mana to control so many ghost corpses. Even I can't last long, Anduin urged when he saw Sirius standing there in shock. Oh. Sirius quickly nodded and began inspecting the corpses one by one. It was relatively easy for him to identify Regulus among them because the other corpses had died at the same time and were in a consistent state. The corpses that had died later seemed out of place compared to the others. Sure enough, after a while, Sirius found a familiar figure among the corpses. Although Regulus looked like a living corpse, Sirius could still recognize his once handsome features. Sirius's face was etched with a mix of relief and sorrow as he found Regulus. Despite Regulus being a corpse, Sirius embraced his brother tightly, tears streaming down his face. Anduin, seeing that Sirius had finally found Regulus, commanded the remaining living corpses to return to the water. He had no need for these ghostly entities, as he already had more advanced ghost guards at his disposal. Regulus, we're going home, Sirius whispered, carefully lifting his brother's body and walking towards the portal. Anduin followed, having dispelled the living corpses. Once they arrived, Anduin crafted a coffin and placed Regulus's body inside. He then gently patted Sirius, who was still mourning. At least we didn't leave Regulus out there. Sirius sighed deeply, struggling to stand. Thank you, Anduin. Without you, I might never have known the truth. Regulus is my hero. There's no need to thank me, Anduin replied, shaking his head. Regulus's spirit is indeed admirable. The real villain, heir is Voldemort. If it weren't for him, your brother would still be alive. Let's go, Sirius said, shuddering. We need to confront Creature and find out what happened. I won't rest until I know the truth. All right, Anduin nodded, and they returned to number 12 Grimmauld Place. Only half a day had passed since they left. Harry was in his room, engrossed in sensory training, while in the living room, Dobby and Creature were in a heated argument. Damn it, who allowed you to mess with things here? This house belongs to the noble Black family, and everything here is a precious inheritance. Creature barked, blocking Dobby from cleaning. But the furniture is moldy and falling apart. Can't you even clean them? Dobby retorted, glaring at Creature. Living in such a filthy place will make you sick. How dare you insult the great Black family? Creature roared, lunging at Dobby. At that moment, Anduin and Sirius apparated into the living room. Sirius immediately grabbed Creature, his eyes blazing with fury. Tell me, how did my brother Regulus die? Sirius demanded. Creature, terrified, struggled in Sirius's grip. But at the mention of Regulus's name, he seemed to break down, writhing and crying like a child. Master Sirius, you were always the bad boy of the Black family. You don't deserve to speak of Master Regulus, Creature sobbed, his body shaking violently. Sirius, familiar with Creature's behavior, threw him down gently but firmly. Shut up and calm down. That's an order, he commanded. Creature immediately stopped crying, though his body still trembled with emotion. Now, tell me exactly what happened to Regulus. I want to know the cause of his death, Sirius said, his voice cold and eyes burning with anger. Master Regulus told me not to reveal his secret, Creature retorted stubbornly. I am your master, and you cannot disobey my orders, Sirius said, closing his eyes in pain. When he opened them again, he spoke slowly. I have found Regulus's body. There is no need to keep this secret anymore. What? Master Sirius found Master Regulus's body? That's impossible. Master Regulus was dragged into the lake by those ghost corpses, right in front of me, Creature exclaimed, his eyes wide with disbelief and pain. You knew all along. Sirius's expression hardened. You were with Regulus in that cave, weren't you? Why didn't you bring him back? Hearing Sirius mention the cave, Creature finally believed him. At this moment, he began to recount everything that had transpired that year, leaving no detail unspoken. End of chapter. Chapter 831, Bertha Jorkins. It turned out that not long after joining the Death Eaters, Regulus began to waver in his commitment to their cause. However, he was still unwilling to openly resist the other Death Eaters and Voldemort. One day, Voldemort proposed to Regulus that he use his house elf, Kreacher. Regulus considered it an honor and gave Kreacher to Voldemort. Voldemort used Kreacher to test the safety of his Horcrux hiding place. After the test, Voldemort left, abandoning Kreacher alone in the cave. Remembering Regulus' order to return home, Kreacher managed to apparate back to the Black family's old house before drinking the potion and before the Inferi could drag him to the bottom of the lake. He then told Regulus everything that had happened. At that moment, Regulus discovered that the locket Voldemort had hidden was a Horcrux and realized that this was the secret to Voldemort's immortality. This revelation became the catalyst for Regulus to decide to betray Voldemort. As Anduin had guessed, Regulus made a replica of the locket and ordered Kreacher to take him to the cave where the real locket was hidden. In a touching act of bravery, Regulus chose to drink the potion himself in the cave, knowing that only Kreacher could escape from there. He sacrificed himself and ordered Kreacher to take the real locket and replace it with the fake one, leaving him alone to find a way to destroy the Horcrux. After hearing the whole story, Sirius slumped on the sofa as if deflated, while Kreacher lay on the floor and cried as if he had lost his soul. Even Anduin couldn't help but feel admiration for Regulus, who had taken the initiative to sacrifice himself at such a critical moment. He could have easily abandoned Kreacher. After a while, Anduin looked at Kreacher again. "Where is the real Horcrux now?" "I locked it in the closet in Master Regulus's room. It's all because of Kreacher's uselessness. After so long, I couldn't completely destroy that Horcrux," Kreacher said, his voice filled with despair. Kreacher tried his best. Kreacher burned it with fire and smashed it with stones, but that strange locket still didn't move at all. Kreacher then rushed to the fireplace and began to self-harm with a fire stick. But Sirius, with quick reflexes, grabbed Kreacher and cursed at him. "Regulus told you to come back, not to let you abuse yourself like this. Your life. He gave it to me. Let me be sober." Apparently, after hearing Kreacher's account of the past, Sirius's attitude towards him had changed. This was the person who had devoted his trust to his brother at the last moment of his life. Anduin saw that Sirius had finally regained his composure, so he left the living room in peace and found the locket in Regulus's bedroom. Anduin breathed a sigh of relief after confirming that the last Horcrux was secured. 2 days later, in the cemetery in Godric's Hollow, Sirius and Anduin held a small-scale funeral for Regulus. Kreacher, Harry, and Dobby attended as well. During the ceremony, Kreacher was even more sorrowful than Sirius. In fact, 2 days ago, when Anduin showed Regulus' body to Kreacher, he was very emotional. The only good news was that the relationship between Sirius and Kreacher had improved during this period. Now Kreacher was no longer as sarcastic as before. According to Anduin's guess, the reason why Kreacher had become so extreme before might have been due to the influence of the Horcrux. After staying with Horcruxes for so long, it was no wonder his mind had been affected. How about it? What's next? In front of Regulus's tombstone, Anduin approached Sirius and asked softly, "I just want to see Voldemort die right before my eyes." Sirius murmured, his eyes red from crying at his brother's grave. "They must pay the price, whether it is Voldemort or those Death Eaters," Sirius repeated, looking intently at Anduin. "To be honest, I was a little hesitant about your plan to wipe them all out before, but after experiencing what happened to Regulus, I want those bastards destroyed more than you. Oh. So, some dirty things shouldn't be allowed to exist in the world." Anduin nodded slightly, then looked at Klitsch in the distance. "What about him? I just heard from Dobby that you terminated his employment." "I asked Klitsch's opinion before. He wanted to stay by Regulus's side forever and guard his spirit for the rest of his life," Sirius said, his eyes full of melancholy as he looked at the house elf who had once seemed hideous to him. "In terms of feelings for Regulus, Klitsch may care more deeply than I do. He has been living in pain all these years. This is the first time Klitsch has made a request to anyone, so I decided to fulfill it." "Of course." A smile suddenly appeared on Sirius's face. "I really can't bear to live with him any longer. He's been more talkative than before these past 2 days." Seeing Sirius in this state, Anduin knew that he had mostly gotten over Regulus's sorrow. Of course, it might also be because Sirius chose to hide this sadness deeper in his heart. After dealing with Regulus's funeral, Klitsch bid farewell to everyone and settled in Godric's Hollow Cemetery. However, to avoid scaring the Muggles who lived there, Anduin specially prepared an alchemy item with a confusion spell for Klitsch. This item could deflect the sight of non-wizard creatures, making them think they were looking at an empty space. Sirius took Harry back to 12 Grimmauld Place. Among them, the happiest was Dobby, who could finally give the Blacks' old house a thorough cleaning. As for Anduin, he returned to his base camp with the few Horcruxes he had harvested during this period. He planned to use the summer vacation to study them carefully and try to see if he could destroy the soul fragments without destroying the objects themselves. These items were relics of the founders of Hogwarts, proper antiques with their own unique functions. The Ravenclaw diadem, for instance, was said to increase the wisdom of the wearer. Hufflepuff's gold cup could change the water poured into it into various wines, beverages, and even condiments such as soy sauce according to the user's wishes, showcasing Hufflepuff's love of life and cooking. The Slytherin locket had healing properties, allowing the wizard wearing it to slowly repair wounds and even providing certain anti-aging and beauty effects. Anduin had discovered from his time at Ilvermorny's School of Witchcraft and Wizardry that despite Slytherin's sinister and treacherous image, he was a highly skilled physician who even ran the school infirmary at Hogwarts. This was evident from the healing effect of the snakewood after it had transformed into a tree. Although the effectiveness of these items was not particularly useful to Anduin, they still had significant research value. It would be a pity to destroy them outright. However, when Anduin returned to his base research institute, he found a strange woman lying in the laboratory hall. Hogg and Shaltair were whispering something around her. "Cough, cough!" Anduin coughed twice, waking the two who were studying the strange woman. "Who is this, and why did she appear here inexplicably?" Anduin asked. The two, startled by his presence, turned around immediately. Hogg was the first to answer. "My lord, we picked up this woman from Albania." "Picked her up?" Anduin hadn't figured out what nonsense Hogg was talking about, but Shaltair continued to add. "My lord, do you remember when you told us to monitor Voldemort? Hogg and I have been following that old guy all this time. Recently, he transferred his soul out of the Horcrux and parasitized it on a mouse. He escaped, had no idea I would faint like that. Thank you for your help, Mr. Wilson." Anduin gave a reassuring smile. "It's no trouble at all, Miss Jorkins, but I'm curious, what were you doing in Albania? It's quite far from the Ministry of Magic." Bertha hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around as if trying to piece together her thoughts. I was following a lead. There were rumors about some dark activities in the area, and I thought it might be connected to some old cases we had at the Ministry. I didn't expect to run into Peter Pettigrew." "Peter Pettigrew?" Anduin's interest piqued. "What do you know about him?" "Not much, I'm afraid," Bertha admitted, looking a bit embarrassed. "I recognized him from some old reports. He was supposed to be dead, but there he was, alive and well. I thought if I could follow him, I might uncover something important." Anduin nodded thoughtfully. "It's good that you were vigilant, but it's dangerous to go after someone like Pettigrew alone. Next time, you should inform your superiors or get some backup." "You're right," Bertha agreed, looking chastened. "I was just so eager to prove myself. I didn't think it through." "Well, you're safe now," Anduin said, glancing at Shaltair and Hogg. "We'll make sure you get back to the Ministry safely. But first, we need to figure out what to do about Pettigrew." Shaltair stepped forward, her expression serious. "We can't let him slip away again. If Voldemort is looking for him, it means he's important to their plans." "Agreed," Anduin said. "We need to act quickly." "Hogg, can you track Pettigrew's movements?" Hogg nodded. "I can. We have a rough idea of where he was last seen. If we move fast, we might catch up to him." "Good," Anduin said, turning back to Bertha. "Miss Jorkins, we'll get you back to the Ministry, but we need you to stay quiet about what you've seen here. Can you do that?" Bertha nodded vigorously. "Of course, Mr. Wilson. I won't say a word." "Thank you," Anduin said, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Now, let's get moving. We have a rat to catch." With that, the group quickly gathered their things and set off, determined to find Peter Pettigrew before he could cause any more trouble. I didn't expect to have an inexplicable fainting problem. I really thank you for your help, Bertha said, smiling and nodding slightly at Shaltir, who felt a bit embarrassed. As for my trip to Albania, Bertha paused, as if trying to recall something. After a moment, she continued, I remember I was on vacation in Albania. Some time ago, I was always messing up the preparations for the Quidditch World Cup. Director Bagman granted me a long vacation to let me relax. But Bertha hesitated, as if trying to piece together a memory. Before that, I remember seeing a wanted criminal who had been missing for a long time. I was about to follow him to see who he was, but I can't remember clearly. End of this chapter. Chapter 832, Exchange Students? Seeing Bertha's performance, Anduin didn't know whether to be thankful for her bad memory or to pity her. How did she get admitted to the Ministry of Magic in this state? After thinking about it for a long time, Bertha still had no clue and finally gave up, saying, Sorry, I really can't remember what happened before I fell into a coma, but I still have to thank you for your help. If it weren't for you, I might really be in trouble. Hearing Bertha's words, Shaltir and Hogg couldn't help but laugh. Although the witch in front of them seemed a bit scatterbrained, her simple and honest character made them feel a little guilty. Originally, they had knocked her out, but now she was thanking them, which was somewhat embarrassing. You're welcome. We are loyal partners of the Ministry of Magic, and we should help each other, Anduin replied, his face much thicker than the others. It's just that my subordinates brought you back to England, which may have delayed your vacation in Albania. It's okay, Bertha waved her hands dismissively. Anyway, there's nothing interesting in that place, and I don't have any valuables left there, so I'll just treat it as if I'm returning home early. It's just... As if thinking of something, Bertha suddenly became distressed. Going back to the Ministry of Magic like this might make Director Bagman unhappy. It sounds like your job in the Ministry of Magic is not going well. Have you thought about changing to another department? Shaltir asked, feeling a bit sorry for Bertha. No department wants me, Bertha grumbled. Since my memory has become bad, I've been driven from one department to another. Finally, Director Bagman and the Department of Magical Sports took me in. Huh? Anduin raised his eyebrows. Did your memory get worse later? That's right, Bertha nodded. They all said it was the result of my misuse of inferior beauty potions. But that's nonsense. The potions I bought were all top-quality goods from Mrs. Pimpernel's beauty potion shop. Mrs. Pimpernel's beauty potions? The beauty potions in that store are indeed of inferior quality, but it seems they are just mixed with some water. Is there a side effect of memory loss? Anduin shook his head in confusion, and then comforted her with a smile. I happened to have some business exchanges with the Department of Magical Sports recently. I'll ask Director Bagman if he agrees to let you go back to work early. Do you have a communicator? Yes, Bertha nodded with a smile. Speaking of which, the communicator you invented is really remarkable. It is said that Albania is about to connect to the magic net, and they even started pre-sales there. After Bertha left her communicator number with Anduin, she was escorted out of the research institute by Shaltir, while Hogg let out a sigh of relief. It's so dangerous, my lord. I thought I was in trouble. You did the right thing, and this is actually saving Bertha. If Peter finds out that she is following him, I'm afraid her life will be in danger. Anduin shook his head lightly and then instructed, Keep an eye on Voldemort. I'm not sure if he will find the positioning magic hidden in the memory fragments. Anyway, don't let him get away. Understood, but you just said that you are looking for Director Bagman. Are you planning to put the dungeon business on the agenda? Hogg asked. Yes, Anduin nodded. There have been enough tests, and it's time to put 1 or 2 products on the market. Of course, this matter has not yet been decided, and it may not be done immediately. At least it has to be officially launched next year. At this time next year, it seems to be the Quidditch World Cup. Hogg's eyes lit up. Maybe we can use this opportunity to promote to wizards all over the world. I also have this idea, so I have to prepare in advance. Besides the World Cup next year, there may be another major event that might restart, Anduin said with a mysterious smile. A major event? Restart? Hog tilted his head in confusion. That's right. Some time ago, Fudge, Dumbledore, and I were discussing the topic of restarting the international competition, the Triwizard Tournament, which has been interrupted for hundreds of years, Anduin explained. The Triwizard Tournament? Isn't that the event where many people died? Hog asked, clearly knowledgeable about the subject. Yes, the event was interrupted in the past mainly because of its dangers. Every few sessions, there would be casualties among the participants, Anduin elaborated. However, after Dumbledore saw the dungeon project we launched, he suddenly had the idea of restarting the Triwizard Tournament. Is he interested in the safety and security measures in our project? Hog nodded knowingly, then said excitedly, Then let's take this opportunity and take over the whole event. I have similar thoughts, but the specifics are still being discussed. The main resistance isn't from the Ministry of Magic or Dumbledore, but from the other two schools abroad, Anduin said. They have no objection to restarting the Triwizard Tournament and are confident in the security provided by Silver Flash Trading Company, but they still have concerns, Anduin continued. After all, I'm a professor at Hogwarts, and they're afraid that I'll take sides during the event. Isn't Karkaroff the principal of Durmstrang? He still dares to disobey your decision, Hog asked, curling his lips in displeasure. Durmstrang isn't entirely up to him, Anduin shook his head helplessly. Beauxbatons also have a lot of opinions, so it's inevitable to argue with them on these trivial matters. In that case, why not let them send the students who are going to participate in the competition to live and study together at Hogwarts? That way, they will have nothing to say, Hog muttered angrily. Huh? Anduin frowned upon hearing this. Don't tell me, this is actually a good idea. A few days later, in the conference room of the Ministry of Magic, Anduin and Dumbledore came to discuss the specific matters of preparing for the Triwizard Tournament. In addition, Fudge, Director Ludo Bagman of the Department of Magical Sports, and Barty Crouch, Director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, were present. That's how it is. Anduin repeated his advice. Do you want Durmstrang's and Beauxbatons students to come to Hogwarts as exchange students a year in advance? Dumbledore stroked his long beard and nodded with a smile. I don't have any objections. This kind of communication is also a good thing for the school and the students, but I don't know whether the two schools will agree. I can formally send them a letter to ask for their opinions, Director Crouch offered. For the Ministry of Magic, if the long-suspended Triwizard Tournament can be successfully held in the UK, it will be a significant achievement, not much easier than the Quidditch World Cup. Not bad, Fudge responded with a smile. Our Ministry of Magic will fully support the Triwizard Tournament and ensure its successful completion. Of course, the Triwizard Tournament is very important and the Quidditch World Cup cannot be missed, Chief Bagman interjected inappropriately. I have already surveyed the location of the competition in advance. The building construction, light and shadow equipment, etc., that will be used at that time have also been ordered from Silver Flash Trading Company. Mr. Wilson, don't just focus on the Triwizard Tournament and forget about the business. Don't worry, Director Bagman. There is still 1 year before the World Cup starts, and the corresponding props and equipment will definitely be produced in advance, Anduin assured. Why don't you add some security equipment to the venue and its surroundings? At that time, it's estimated that tens of thousands of wizards will gather, and it could easily cause trouble, Anduin suggested with a helpless smile. The director, Bagman, in front of him, was a former professional Quidditch player and a serious ex-star. His enthusiasm for Quidditch clearly surpassed other sports. Even today, during a meeting meant to discuss the Triwizard Tournament, Bagman couldn't help but intervene, which seemed a bit ignorant. That's right, Director Crouch chimed in, following Anduin's words. Luke, you've invested too much in lighting, sound, camera, and architecture. I think I've accepted the proposal you submitted. The higher-ups don't consider security-related issues at all, and they don't even care about guarding against muggles. Logically speaking, wizards present should be required to wear muggle clothes to prevent them from being discovered. This can alleviate many magical accidents and disasters. And why did you specifically specify that in the finals? You must be the commentator of the game? Crouch, an old and experienced official, couldn't help but complain to Bagman, the young director. The budget is limited. Do you know what a limited budget is? The most important thing about the Quidditch World Cup is to present the most gorgeous stadium and games to the audience in front of the scene and the magic video camera. Don't interrupt if you don't understand. Bagman pursed his lips and rolled his eyes at Crouch. The two were already at odds. When Barty Crouch was still the director of the Law Enforcement Department, he had almost sent Bagman to Azkaban for providing information to the Death Eaters. But Bagman had only said a few more words to his father's friend, not knowing the other party was a Death Eater. Fortunately, his status as a star Quidditch player helped him avoid the crime. Crouch's face turned unsightly at Bagman's retort, and he could only look to Fudge for help. Seeing this, Fudge had no choice but to ask Anduin for advice. "Mr. Wilson, what do you think of this? Why are you dumping your affairs on me?" Anduin cursed inwardly, then smoothed things over. There's nothing wrong with Director Bagman's considerations. The experience of watching the game is indeed a very important part. And he is taking care of my business, so there's absolutely no reason to refuse, Anduin thought, complaining again. Bagman raised his chin proudly, appearing complacent. However, Anduin added, "However, safety must be considered. After all, tens of thousands of people will gather at the same time. If something goes wrong and there are casualties, it will make international headlines. The ministry will have a bad reputation." Fudge nodded repeatedly. What he valued most was the reputation of the Ministry of Magic. He then patted his chest boldly. In that case, the Ministry of Magic should add another part of the budget. Without cutting other projects, the new budget will be all about security. Is that okay? Fudge's willingness to allocate more funds was mainly because the Ministry of Magic's financial revenue this year was quite optimistic. He did not expect such a magic net to provide so many benefits. The rest of the attendees were naturally happy with his proposal. With more money to spend, there was nothing to complain about. Seeing that the problems had been satisfactorily resolved, everyone prepared to end the meeting. Anduin didn't forget to ask a question before the end. "By the way, Director Bagman, do you remember Bertha Jorkins? She should be an employee of your Department of Magical Sports and Games." Asked by Anduin, Bagman immediately stopped standing up. Strangely, Director Crouch next to him froze upon hearing the name. No one paid attention to him, so it wasn't surprising. "Bertha." Bagman nodded. "She is indeed my subordinate, but she seems to be on vacation recently. Why did you suddenly mention her?" "It's like this," Anduin began, recounting the fabricated story. He explained how Bertha had fallen, passed out, and was subsequently rescued by his people. She wanted to know if she could come back to work early, but she was too embarrassed to ask you directly, so she asked me to bring it up. "I see." Bagman didn't seem surprised by Bertha's situation. "Let her continue to rest. She tends to create chaos in the ministry. She even messes up taking meeting minutes. Isn't this essentially dismissing her in a roundabout way?" Anduin frowned slightly, puzzled. "If that's the case, why did you hire her in the first place? Who knew her mind would suddenly go haywire?" Bagman pointed to his head and complained helplessly. Bertha was known for her excellent memory when she first joined. Her only flaw was that she wasn't very bright and had a tendency to gossip. But since her memory deteriorated, her only advantage disappeared, while her flaws remained. Because of her forgetfulness, the gossip she spreads is now more like baseless rumors. She can't help me anymore, and I'm just grateful if she doesn't cause trouble. Not many people in the department like her. At this point, Bagman suddenly pointed at Crouch and complained, "If you want to blame someone, blame Crouch." Bertha's mind went bad after she visited Crouch's house. Maybe it's his fault. End of this chapter. Chapter 833, Old Batty's Secret. Crouch's expression froze, and his face darkened immediately. "How can this be blamed on me? It's obviously your fault." "You told me it has nothing to do with you," Bagman retorted, curling his lips like a rogue. "I asked her to get your signature that day, and after she came back, she was like this. If you ask me, it must be your fault." Crouch was speechless at Bagman's words. After thinking for a while, he came up with a justification. "When Bertha was leaving my house, she accidentally bumped into a eucalyptus tree in the yard. It was broken then, just like this time. Anduin couldn't help but frown slightly at Crouch's explanation. Wasn't Director Crouch's reaction a little too radical? And the excuse about the tree sounded very unreliable. After all, Anduin knew best that Bertha fell unconscious, and he had made it up. He never thought that Director Crouch would use such a flimsy reason to justify it. It sounded like a made-up story. However, Bagman didn't really want to blame Crouch for Bertha's condition. He was more concerned with venting his dissatisfaction, so he didn't pursue the matter further. When Crouch saw this, he actually showed a relieved expression, which made Anduin even more suspicious. Could it be that Bertha's condition was really related to Director Crouch? Crouch also seemed to be aware of Anduin's scrutiny. After a few evasive words, he left the scene with a guilty conscience, almost as if he were running away. Don't pay attention to that old fellow Crouch. Since the death of his wife and child, old Batty's temper has become more and more strange. He always gets angry over inexplicable things, Bagman said, looking at Crouch's retreating back with indifference. He then smiled and approached Anduin. Let's talk about some serious business. The dungeon project you mentioned before has been approved for commercialization, and I am very interested in it. Bagman's words were, of course, nonsense. He didn't even know what dungeons were. He was only interested in Anduin and Silver Flash Trading Company. It's just that the committee still has some concerns about safety, so they plan to organize an investigation team in the next school year. They want to spend a few days at Hogwarts to research and check the overall operation of the dungeon project on site. Bagman seemed worried that his words might cause Anduin's dissatisfaction and quickly explained, "Of course, everyone is very confident in the things you create. This so-called investigation is just a formality. As long as there are no major accidents, there should be no problem. After all, you haven't heard of any issues with the new dungeon project, right? No problem. You can visit the dungeon at Hogwarts anytime, and you don't even need to inform me in advance." Anduin replied lightly. Seeing Anduin's confidence, Bagman gradually relaxed. The boss in front of him was a cash cow for the Ministry of Magic, and every department was eager to have a relationship with him. So, in the past 2 years, since the Department of Magical Sports and Silver Flash Trading Co. Ltd. had been involved in cooperation, Bagman had been very active. However, Anduin seemed to be focusing on other things at the moment. When he looked at Bagman again, he asked about Crouch. "You mentioned earlier that Minister Crouch's wife and child are gone? When did this happen?" "About 8 or 9 years ago." Although it was unclear why Anduin was interested in such a thing, Bagman answered truthfully. "If I remember correctly, it was not long after Barty Crouch Jr. was tried. First, Barty Crouch Jr. was found dead in his cell due to weakness. Not long after that, old Crouch announced that his wife had also died from grief." "Hey," Bagman sighed. "I hadn't become the director of the Department of Magical Sports at that time. I had just started my career. I retired from the Wimborne Hornets and was working in the Quidditch team's sports room under Union command. During that time, old Crouch seemed to lack energy every day, and looked preoccupied. He must have still been grieving his wife's death." "Oh, couldn't he be sad about his son's death?" Anduin raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Him? Come on," Bagman sneered. "That guy doesn't have any feelings for little Barty. Have you forgotten how he treated his relatives back then? When Crouch was being tried, he didn't even listen to his son's excuses. He hastily sentenced him to the maximum penalty. It was said to be a trial, but it was more like venting his anger." "So that's how it is." Anduin nodded knowingly. In that case, after Barty Jr. was imprisoned, Director Crouch must have never visited the prison. "Not really." Bagman shook his head. Although old Barty was very disappointed with his son, his wife still loved the child deeply. Old Barty often took his wife to Azkaban to visit little Barty. Anduin fell silent upon hearing this. He didn't raise his head until Bagman and the others left the conference room. There must be something wrong with Director Crouch, Anduin thought solemnly. When Bertha was mentioned just now, he must have known something. His expression couldn't be faked. But is he a remnant of a Death Eater? It doesn't seem like it. Anduin recalled the excitement and joy Crouch showed last year when he heard the news that Voldemort had been captured. That emotion couldn't be faked. Then, what Director Crouch is concealing probably has something to do with his wife and children, Anduin guessed. Judging from the information he just learned, Barty Jr.'s sudden death seemed very strange. Anduin had seen him before. He was the one who subdued him in the courtroom. Such a strong young wizard wouldn't suddenly die after just a year or two in Azkaban. It seemed unreasonable. After all, Sirius, who wanted to die all those years ago, managed to persist in Azkaban for so long. There was no reason why little Barty couldn't. Could it be that? A bold guess suddenly appeared in Anduin's mind, but this kind of unfounded speculation didn't support questioning a director. More evidence is needed. Let's start with Bertha. Thinking of this, Anduin quickly left the Ministry of Magic. Late at night, he quietly broke into Bertha Jorkin's residence and used legilimency on her while she was sleeping. After some careful investigation, Anduin discovered that Bertha's memory space had suffered serious damage. The deleted memory happened to be from the time when Bertha went to Crouch's house on business. The memory was cleaned up very thoroughly, leaving no room for restoration, which even affected Bertha's entire thinking. Sure enough, the memories were destroyed by someone, so Director Crouch is very suspicious. What exactly is he trying to hide? Anduin muttered to himself. He then exited Bertha Jorkin's residence and headed to Crouch's house. When he arrived at the Crouch residence, he found that the lights were still on. Anduin cast various invisibility and silence spells on himself and managed to sneak in. In the old house, besides old Barty Crouch, there was also a timid-looking house elf. At that time, old Barty was sitting in the study, handling official business. It was clear that he was quite conscientious in his work, no matter which department he was in. After a while, the house elf appeared in front of old Barty's table and said respectfully, "Master, it's getting late. You should go to bed earlier." Immediately. After the increase in foreign trade in the past 2 years, there are a lot more things to worry about in the department, old Barty replied. With the Quidditch World Cup and the Tri-Wizard Tournament coming up, things are getting quite cumbersome, old Barty said dismissively. Then, he suddenly looked up. "Winky, how is Barty Jr.? Has he fallen asleep?" "Yes, Master. The young master has already rested. He was very good today and didn't cause any trouble," Winky replied, her tone filled with joy. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Master, the young master has been so well behaved these past years. Could you perhaps reward him a day? Little. Even just allowing him to get some fresh air in the garden? Being cooped up at home every day makes him very unhappy." "Humph. Did he put you up to this?" Crouch's face hardened. "Tell him not to be delusional. He is still a prisoner, and being allowed to stay at home is already an act of mercy." Crouch's expression grew even more severe as he remembered the discussion with Bagman and Anduin earlier that day. He looked sharply at Winky. "Also, be more careful when taking care of Barty Jr. Don't chat with him unnecessarily. Do you remember the trouble caused when Bertha found out? If you don't want this place to be investigated, heed my warning." "Yes, Master," Winky said humbly, bowing as she backed out of the room. Left alone in his study, Crouch sighed deeply, weighed down by the situation. Meanwhile, Anduin, who had stealthily entered the room, had heard everything. "Just as I thought," Anduin mused. Old Barty helped his son escape from Azkaban, likely using Polyjuice Potion to disguise his wife. The guards at Azkaban wouldn't have suspected Crouch's identity. Anduin's interest in Barty Crouch Jr., a former Death Eater, was piqued. He silently used a disillusionment charm to exit the room, unnoticed by the preoccupied Crouch. Soon, Anduin found Barty Crouch Jr. in a basement bedroom. The young man was asleep, with a high-quality invisibility cloak on the bedside table. As Anduin approached, he sensed a strong aura of dark magic and identified it as the Imperious Curse. So old Barty uses the Imperious Curse to control Barty Jr. and has Winky take care of him, Anduin thought, shaking his head. He was conflicted about old Barty's actions. As a parent, Crouch didn't want his son to suffer in Azkaban, but as a ministry official, he couldn't let a criminal go free. It was a tangled web of emotions. Director Crouch is upright, but he can't keep Barty Jr., a former Death Eater, around. Doesn't he know that resistance to the Imperious Curse can develop over time? Anduin pondered. Drawing his wand, Anduin aimed it at the sleeping Barty Crouch Jr., ready to end him. But then he reconsidered. Isn't it wasteful to kill him outright? He's still loyal to Voldemort after all these years. He must be valuable. Such a good asset shouldn't be wasted. After some thought, Anduin put away his wand and took out a small metal ball, no larger than a grain of rice. He carefully placed it on Barty Jr.'s nose. The ball sprouted fine, hair-like wires that crawled into Barty Jr.'s nostrils and entered his body. Soon, Barty Jr. stirred in his sleep, feeling uncomfortable. He tried to raise his arm to scratch his nose, but his body was paralyzed by the Imperious Curse. Little Barty's body felt as if it were encased in amber. The Imperious Curse not only controlled his daily actions, but also severely restricted all his movements. He couldn't even raise his hand to scratch an itch or open his eyes. Fortunately, after a while, the itching sensation subsided, and little Barty continued to lose himself in his dream of accompanying his master Voldemort in conquering the world. That should be enough, Anduin muttered to himself, nodding in satisfaction. He quietly exited the Crouch household, leaving the family completely unaware that someone had infiltrated their home. Back at his base camp, Anduin took stock of his recent gains. Voldemort's side is gradually getting on the right track, and today I accidentally discovered that little Barty might have unexpected potential, he mused, reclining on the sofa with a satisfied smile. He gazed thoughtfully into the distance. Ultimately, it all depends on Lockhart's performance in Azkaban. If he can handle things well, it will save me a lot of trouble, Anduin concluded, his mind already planning the next steps. End of this chapter. Chapter 834, Azkaban. On the other side, Lockhart, who had been sent to Azkaban by Anduin, was beginning his new life. Initially, his crimes of fraud and improper use of spells were serious, but not severe enough to warrant a long sentence. The Wizengamot had judged his case as significant, but he was only sentenced to 15 years. However, for reasons unknown to him, he was placed in a high-security area reserved for the most dangerous prisoners. This section featured single cells with specially thickened walls and a higher frequency of Dementor patrols. Azkaban's guard, Slim, found this arrangement peculiar but followed the direct orders from the Ministry of Magic without question. He speculated that Lockhart might have offended someone influential within the ministry. The prisoners in this section were notorious, mostly Death Eaters, captured during the last Wizarding War. As Slim made his rounds, holding a new magic lantern and a magic heater on his belt, he checked on each prisoner. Despite Azkaban's harsh environment, Slim felt warm and comfortable, thanks to the supplies from Silver Flash Trading Company. These materials had allowed him to endure his job for many years, unlike most wizards who couldn't last 3 years without needing a shift change. Slim reminisced about Anduin, who had visited Azkaban with Minister Budnor a few years ago. A slight smile appeared on his face, grateful for the young alchemist's contributions that had improved their working conditions. However, the Ministry of Magic had declined to let Silver Flash Trading Company upgrade Azkaban's security system, likely due to concerns about security and control. Maybe we could have redecorated the prison to make it more livable, Slim muttered to himself, glancing at Lockhart's cell. Lockhart, despite his situation, had kept his cell meticulously clean, a testament to his obsession with cleanliness. Slim couldn't help but frown. Lockhart seemed unusually well for someone who had been in Azkaban for over 10 days. It was as if the Dementors didn't affect him as much. Slim shook his head, thinking Lockhart might be a natural optimist. Perhaps it would take more time for the Dementors to break him, unlike Bellatrix Lestrange in the next cell. Bella, looking like a ghost, glared at Slim with her usual madness. Slim was used to her desperate eyes, even when she looked at her husband in the opposite cell. However, this time, Bella didn't turn away after glaring at Slim. Instead, she moved towards the cell door with a snake-like grace, startling Slim. He took a half-step back, not out of fear for his safety, as he trusted the cell's security, but out of surprise at her unusual behavior. Slim was worried that Bella, a lunatic, might suddenly have an outburst and spit at him. Although such incidents were rare in the highest security cells, they were not unheard of. "Bella," Slim muttered as he approached the cell door. Bella clung to the metal bars like a lizard, her eyes burning with intensity. Her voice was hoarse, like a saw cutting through wood. "I need to ask you something, and and I want an honest answer." Bella's tone was a mix of threat and command. Slim was taken aback. It was the first time in years that Bella had spoken to him so seriously. Usually her words were nothing but curses and insults. "Ask away, but whether I answer depends on my mood," Slim replied nonchalantly. Despite their past as powerful outsiders, he felt no fear when speaking to these felons. Normally, Bella would have lashed out at such a response, but now she seemed desperate, ignoring Slim's casual demeanor. "Tell me honestly, did the Dark Lord really commit suicide in public?" Bella's eyes bore into Slim's, hoping for a denial. "Oh, how did you hear about that?" Slim asked, surprised. He glanced at the cell next to Lockhart's and nodded knowingly. Although Voldemort's suicide had occurred a year ago, news traveled slowly in the isolated confines of Azkaban. Prisoners could only get information from newspapers occasionally sent by relatives, and even that was limited to the less secure upper floors. On Bella's floor, all foreign items, including magical newspapers, were strictly controlled to prevent any chance of escape. Slim guessed that Lockhart, the newcomer, had told Bella. Prison guards rarely chatted with prisoners, so it made sense. Slim smirked coldly, thinking of Bella's unwavering loyalty to Voldemort. "That's right," Slim said triumphantly. "Last summer, Voldemort chose to commit suicide during his trial because he couldn't bear the humiliation." "Impossible! You must be lying to me." Bella's disbelief was palpable. She couldn't accept the news. Around her, weak shouts and curses echoed from other cells. These were former Death Eaters, loyal to Voldemort even in captivity. Slim was pleased with Bella's reaction. This news has spread throughout the international wizarding community. There are even videos of the event. Anyone with a magical camcorder can see what happened. "Ah, you probably don't even know what a magical camcorder is," Slim taunted. "How about I ask the Ministry of Magic to show you the footage of Voldemort's suicide? It's quite a sight. I've watched it dozens of times. You should see it too. Voldemort, the greatest Dark Lord in your mind, humiliated to death. It's truly something." Slim continued to provoke the prisoners with his words, unafraid of any retaliation. The Dementors had drained them of their spirit and magic, leaving them powerless. Sure enough, in the face of Slim's provocation, the prisoners in the cell had no choice but to yell and spit outside. Even after yelling and cursing for a while, most people were too tired to speak. Only Bella, who was more powerful in combat, kept spitting. She cursed Slim over and over again, her eyes ferocious, as if she wanted to devour him on the spot. But Slim was long used to all this, so when he scolded them, he didn't feel any pressure at all. After a long time passed, another person walked down the corridor of the prison. The newcomer was wearing a pink female formal suit. Despite the heavy makeup, she looked like a big pink toad. It was Umbridge, a former Ministry of Magic employee. "Slim." Umbridge stomped and paced to Slim's side, then flinched and glanced at the menacing prisoners around her. She muttered righteously, "It's just an ordinary patrol mission. Why did you take so long? 10 minutes late doesn't matter. What are you in a hurry for?" Slim rolled his eyes at Umbridge. He couldn't understand why the Ministry of Magic had arranged for this annoying person to come to Azkaban. Since this toad joined Azkaban, she had made the entire prison system look like an office workplace, and she even claimed to be the leader. But there were only 4 people in the entire Azkaban. They were all guards, so there was no distinction between superiors and subordinates, and no one usually came to inspect them. Was it necessary to do so many formalistic things? Umbridge put her hands on her hips in dissatisfaction. "Slim, if you fail to complete the patrol mission on time, you are derelict in your duty. If you talk back again, be careful. I'll report you to the headquarters of the Ministry of Magic, and the regular meeting will start soon. What will you do if you're not there?" Slim became even more upset at her words. What else could this idiotic woman do other than threaten with snitching? Did she really consider herself important? A meeting? They never had such meetings before. Seeing Slim's impatient expression, Umbridge's mouth immediately chattered like a small machine gun, annoying Slim to no end. After a while, Slim and the bored Umbridge left the cell. After seeing the two leave, Bella calmed down first and then shouted loudly to the side, "Lockhart! Talk to me! Why? Are you willing to believe my words now?" Lockhart was shaken by Bella's yelling, but soon he managed to calm himself down and replied with a carefree attitude. But I still can't believe that the master would die so easily, no. As if thinking of something, Bella resolutely denied. The master must still be Ali, V. The Dark Lord is immortal. But you also heard what Slim said. Before Lockhart could reply, there was a sudden voice of doubt from the opposite side of Bella's cell. I didn't want to believe that the master would just disappear, and the reappearance of his soul later also represented this, but he committed suicide in full view, and it was a soul suicide. How can it be explained? Despite their earlier outbursts, these Death Eaters could see the authenticity of Slim's words. In fact, from the fact that the other party dared to blatantly say Voldemort's name, it could be confirmed that the other party had no regard for the Dark Lord. Shut up, Rodolphus. You have no right to make false claims about your master's life and death. Bella replied angrily. I'm your husband. Rodolphus cursed back, dissatisfied. We are the servants of the Dark Lord first, and then we are husband and wife. You have to figure out the priority. Bella didn't save face for her husband at all. Her loyalty to the Death Eaters obviously went beyond family relationships. When Rodolphus heard the words, he didn't refute Bella, but complained distressedly. Then tell me what to expect. Is the Dark Lord dead or alive? This is the Master's secret, and it cannot be revealed to you casually. In short, all you need to keep is faith. Bella seemed to know something, but she kept her mouth shut. The Death Eaters, including Rodolphus, frowned at her words. To be honest, they didn't know whether Bella was speaking the truth or if she was losing her mind again. Bella is right. The Dark Lord is indeed not dead. He is still alive. A calm voice came from Lockhart's cell, breaking the tension. Not bad! Not bad! Bella thought Lockhart was supporting her and quickly shouted in agreement. However, several questioning eyes from the neighboring cells turned towards Lockhart. What do you know? Tell us, they demanded. Facing their sharp, sword-like gazes, Lockhart felt his heart race and his spine shiver. Yet his years of deception allowed him to maintain his composure. I know that the Dark Lord is alive, and I also know that he survived because of Horcruxes, he revealed. Sorry for the delay. I had a fever for a week, and it has not completely healed yet. It has been quite torturous, but my current mental state allows me to barely write. Once I fully recover, I will make up for the lost chapters. Additionally, I hope everyone takes care of their health during this season change to avoid getting sick. End of this chapter. Chapter 835. Shut up! After hearing Lockhart mention the word Horcrux, Bella's expression tightened, and she quickly shouted to stop him from continuing. Apparently, Bella was the only one among the Death Eaters who knew that Voldemort had a Horcrux, which made sense since one Horcrux was kept in her vault. The matter of the Horcrux was extremely important to Voldemort, so it must not be easily leaked. But after seeing Bella's reaction, the Death Eaters around her immediately realized that Lockhart's words must be true. Otherwise, Bella's reaction would not have been so intense. Lockhart, go on. After realizing that Lockhart might know a real secret, the behavior of the Death Eaters around him became polarized. Those who were absolutely loyal to Voldemort did not want Lockhart to continue talking and reveal too many secrets about the Dark Lord, including Bella and the Lestrange family. However, there were more who were eager to know more. Of course, their loyalty to Voldemort might not be in question, but they had joined the Death Eaters primarily because they were deranged villains. They had no sense of morality and surrendered to Voldemort mainly out of fear and admiration for his power, not because of shared ideals. Lockhart, who always enjoyed public attention, seemed to become calmer after hearing the shouts outside the cell. He shouted confidently, "That's right, it's a Horcrux. Because the Dark Lord's soul rests on the immortal Horcrux, I can guarantee that the Dark Lord is still alive." The Death Eaters in the surrounding cells nodded secretly. Most of them didn't know much about Horcruxes, only that they were a form of dark magic. But they could sense the certainty in Lockhart's words, and Bella's gaffe made everyone feel more assured. Bella, however, was still flustered. This was Voldemort's core secret, and revealing it publicly could be extremely dangerous for the Dark Lord. She felt a lot of resentment towards Lockhart, and was surprised that he knew such a big secret. She wanted to question him on the spot, but feared revealing more information to the other Death Eaters. Although they were all Voldemort's former loyal subordinates, their degrees of loyalty varied. She couldn't fully trust anyone, especially with many prisoners who had committed other crimes on this floor. Before Bella could struggle for long, Lockhart continued to explain on his own. The so-called Horcrux is a special magical item that contains a split soul. The Dark Lord made a Horcrux for himself. Of course, no one knows how many there are. So it is true that the Dark Lord committed suicide at the public trial, but it is also true that he is still alive. This method of suicide allows the Dark Lord's soul to return to the Horcrux. This is his unique means of escape. How do you know this so clearly? A Death Eater asked, convinced by Lockhart's explanation, but still harboring doubts. Because I've seen one of the Dark Lord's Horcruxes, Lockhart said suddenly, shocking everyone, including Bella. I know you are loyal to the Dark Lord and may resent me for revealing his secret, but the reality is, the Dark Lord's Horcrux is no longer a secret to the outside world. Lockhart seemed to enjoy everyone's surprised expressions, and his condition improved. What? If they were just a little surprised before, Lockhart's words now left everyone in shock. What's going on? Tell us. Tell us quickly. That's right. What's the current situation of the Master? Several Death Eaters asked Lockhart eagerly. Even Bella showed a look of panic. Her only hope in life was Voldemort. If she couldn't even protect the Horcrux, she might truly lose all hope. Hey, this matter is actually related to that Anduin Wilson, and it's also the reason why I was locked up here. Lockhart knew that the most important part of his story was coming up, so he focused even more intently. A year ago, after the Dark Lord chose to commit suicide to escape, he was resurrected through a Horcrux and entered Hogwarts by chance, Lockhart began. At that time, as a world-renowned adventurer, I was also invited by Dumbledore to enter Hogwarts and become the professor of defense against the dark arts for that school year. Lockhart adopted a sincere and thoughtful demeanor, coupled with his previously inscrutable appearance, which made everyone feel a bit of awe towards him. So everyone listened quietly and attentively. You may not know, Lockhart smiled bitterly. Although I am not a Death Eater, I have always admired the deeds of the Dark Lord. It is a pity that I had just graduated and had not had time to join the Death Eaters before the Dark Lord disappeared from the wizarding world. At Hogwarts, I accidentally discovered traces of the Dark Lord's Horcrux, Lockhart continued, adopting the air of a master. As an adventurer who has been traveling all year round, I have always been very sensitive to treasure hunting. So, not long after school started, I followed the clues and found the Dark Lord. When all the Death Eaters heard that Lockhart had contact with Voldemort, they immediately became excited, especially Bella and the others at the core. They couldn't help but ask questions excitedly. How is the Master's current situation? When is he going to counterattack the wizarding world? The Dark Lord has infiltrated Hogwarts, and he must have turned the place upside down. Was that old man Dumbledore killed by the Master? Seeing that these Death Eaters still maintain the blind confidence in Voldemort from more than 10 years ago, Lockhart couldn't help curling his lips. But in order to win everyone's trust, he continued against his will. Because of the previous suicide, the condition of the Dark Lord is not as good as expected. But after my careful maintenance, he has recovered a lot. It's a pity that the Dark Lord was still in a soul state at that time, and his strength was far from complete. That's why he couldn't resist when he was discovered by Anduin Wilson. Huh? Bella was startled when she heard the words. You mean the Master who was reborn through the Horcrux was finally discovered? By this Anduin? That's right, Lockhart nodded. That Anduin is a wizard on Dumbledore's side, and he is very strong. Even with me, he can fight on equal terms. Not to mention that he himself is a master alchemist and has a lot of combat equipment at his disposal. So after he accidentally found out, I was defeated by this bastard, and at the same time, the Dark Lord fell into his hands again. Although this explanation sounded simple, Lockhart demonstrated various narrative techniques to the fullest. The relationship between him and Voldemort, their resistance after being discovered by Anduin, their respective thoughts, and the details of the final battle all seemed true in his telling. It can only be said that Lockhart is worthy of being a novelist. In terms of storytelling ability, no one could match him. So those Death Eaters were taken aback by Lockhart's story. How could they have heard such a vivid account? The rich details were simply outrageous. Even what Voldemort said and how Lockhart loyally protected him created a real picture in their minds. What? At the same time, when Bella and a group of Death Eaters heard that Voldemort was resurrected through the Horcrux, they thought that the Dark Lord could take this opportunity. Who would have thought that the end of the story would turn around and be caught again? The Master even got the Horcruxes captured, so a Death Eater couldn't help but exclaim. He didn't know how many Horcruxes Voldemort had, so in his mind, capturing one might mean the end of the Dark Lord. Master is far-sighted. How can something happen so easily? Bella glared at the other party with a ferocious face. She obviously knew more than the rest, so she said firmly, Master has countless Horcruxes. Even if one or two are destroyed, it doesn't matter much. That's good. The most loyal Death Eaters heaved a sigh of relief and then looked at Lockhart curiously. Continue talking. What happened to Master R? After the previous conversation, everyone was basically sure that this Lockhart was one of them. After all, the other party took care of Voldemort, who was in the state of a Horcrux for a long time. Later, Lockhart showed bitterness. Before he was captured, the Dark Lord told me to bear the burden of humiliation and find a way to escape before going to him, and then he committed suicide again. Master! Bella was so angry after hearing Lockhart's narration, and there was endless evil in her heart. That damned Anduin, I must cut him into pieces and use the Cruciatus curse to torture him into an idiot. Except for Bella, the other Death Eaters also shouted and cursed angrily. Of course, they liked to scold when they had nothing to do in Azkaban. No one knew how many of them really cursed for Voldemort. So, you finally lost contact with the Master? Bella's husband, Rodolphus, asked Lockhart after regaining his composure a few minutes later. Lockhart was still thinking about how to continue. After all, Anduin hadn't finished his lines, so when he saw someone asking him, he quickly picked up the conversation. Since encountering Anduin's surprise attack, Lord Darklord's consciousness has completely disappeared from the Horcrux, and I was also arrested by that guy. And when that bastard found out that the Dark Lord hadn't been left behind, he became furious and wanted to search my memory, trying to find out the information that Lord Darklord gave me. But how can I be so easily captured by legilimency? Speaking of this, Lockhart raised his chest with great confidence. In the end, I was imprisoned by Anduin and Dumbledore for nearly a month, and when they found that they couldn't get any useful information from me, I was charged with a random crime and imprisoned in Azkaban. No wonder. The Death Eaters, including Rodolphus, nodded in sudden realization. They were very aware of the situation in Azkaban and knew that most of the prisoners on this floor were Death Eaters serving life sentences or villains who had committed super felonies. Since the end of the Wizard War, no wizard had been placed on this floor for a long time, so when they saw Lockhart being locked up next to them, everyone was very curious. After all, Lockhart looked handsome, and he was an adventurer and writer by profession. His crime was even more despicable fraud, and they knew he would not be locked up here for no reason. It wasn't until today that they finally realized that Lockhart's crimes were not much less serious than theirs. After having been in close contact with Voldemort for so long, many Death Eaters might not have had this honor back then. Dying? No, before disappearing. Did the Master tell you anything else? Did he mention us? Bella asked softly. After a brief chat, Bella lost her initial hostility towards Lockhart, and even at this moment, in her eyes, he was no different from her own. If you are really sleepy, someone will give you a pillow. Lockhart was secretly delighted. He found that the Death Eaters in front of him were as foolish as they were full of evil. They were even more deceitful than those readers, and now they even took the initiative to ask him what he was going to say. Before he disappeared, the Dark Lord did leave. Lockhart suddenly adopted a serious demeanor, looking at everyone with a grave expression. He specifically instructed that if I couldn't escape and was captured by Anduin and Dumbledore and ultimately imprisoned in Azkaban, I should find a way to rescue his once loyal servants. Rescue us? The Death Eaters erupted in surprise at his words. They hadn't expected Voldemort's last instructions to concern them. Several Death Eaters who remained loyal to Voldemort showed expressions of excitement and gratitude. In their hearts, it was an immense honor that Voldemort still thought of them. But, you alone, how could you rescue us? Rodolphus, more composed than the others, questioned. He was well aware of the stringent security measures in Azkaban. Beyond the anti-apparition magic enveloping the entire prison, the Dementors alone were a formidable obstacle. The wizards guarding Azkaban were not the primary defense. The true sentinels were the Dementors, who fed on positive emotions and even souls. Of course, I can't do it alone, Lockhart replied with a triumphant smile. But before the Dark Lord left, he gave me a good plan. I apologize for the interruption in updates over the past few days. My condition worsened again, and after enduring a high fever for more than a week, my family decided to take me to the hospital. After a few days of treatment, my temperature finally stabilized. Although my body is still a bit weak, I should be able to continue without further interruptions. Thank you for your concern. End of this chapter. Chapter 36. Today. What way, and why is the Master so eager to rescue us? Upon hearing that there was a chance to regain their freedom, the Death Eaters went wild with anticipation. Even some felons who did not belong to the Death Eaters' camp couldn't help but listen intently. Before he left, the Dark Lord specifically instructed me to find a way to rescue all his servants in Azkaban. After all, he is in a very precarious situation now, with strong enemies like Anduin constantly causing trouble. He really needs your help. Seeing everyone's enthusiastic response, Lockhart quickly fabricated a reason for rescuing them to ensure they believed it. So that's the case. Then tell me the solution quickly, so that we can go out and tear that damned Anduin into pieces. Bella felt worse than herself when she heard that Voldemort was in a difficult situation. Don't worry, please listen to me explain slowly. Lockhart cleared his throat and said, the reason why no one has been able to escape from Azkaban for so many years is not because of the strong cells, the remote location, or the strict magical protection, but the guards here, the Dementors. The Death Eaters around couldn't help but nod in agreement. Indeed, as Lockhart said, these crazy thugs were not contained by mere prison doors. Each one of them was proficient in casting spells without a wand. Even if various counter-curses were engraved on these prisons, they might not be able to stop a powerful transfiguration or explosion spell. The main reason why everyone was trapped here was because of those heinous Dementors. When these magical creatures use the Dementor's kiss to suck the soul of a wizard, they not only drain happy memories, but also continuously consume a wizard's energy and magic power. Therefore, wizards who have been visited by these monsters often look sluggish and drained, as if they are overindulged. The stricter the cell, the more frequent the visits from Dementors. For these Death Eaters, a group of Dementors would come to feed every morning, noon, and evening, with meals being extremely regular. So, despite the screams of these Death Eaters, there was actually no magic power left in their bodies. The only part of their bodies that could fight was their mouths. Because of this, in the cells with relatively low security on the upper floors, you could occasionally see individual wizards escape from the prison. However, they were usually recaptured, as the Dementors patrolling the area were relentless. When they heard Lockhart say that they could be rescued, most people were full of disbelief. Even if the other party had some means to get them out of the cell, it would be useless if they couldn't escape Azkaban itself. It would be futile if they could not evade the prying eyes and attacks of the Dementors. But as he spoke, Lockhart displayed an incomparably confident expression. However, if someone observed carefully, they could see a hint of unease hidden in his demeanor. You don't know that the Dark Lord was already planning for a rainy day when he was in the Horcrux state. At that time, when he was in a state of extreme depression, he asked me to create a batch of magical items specifically designed to restrain Dementors. It's also thanks to my proficiency in all kinds of magic, including alchemy and spells. Otherwise, even if someone else had the Dark Lord's blueprint, they wouldn't have been able to make these things. Alchemy props that can restrain dementors? All the Death Eaters were surprised when they heard this. But soon, Rodolphus couldn't help but question. Props that can restrain dementors may really exist, but even if they do, how did you bring them into Azkaban? The rest of the people also showed curious expressions, waiting for Lockhart's explanation. They had a sudden realization. Rodolphus's eyes widened. Could it be that you hid those items in a place where no one would think to look? He asked, his voice filled with a mix of awe and disgust. Lockhart's lips curled into a sly smile. Exactly. The Dark Lord, his instructions were very clear. The items are small enough to be hidden in a place that would avoid detection during the standard checks. I had to endure a lot to bring them in, but it was worth it. The room fell silent as the Death Eaters processed this information. The idea of hiding magical items in such a manner was both ingenious and revolting. Bella, always the more pragmatic one, broke the silence. So, how do we retrieve these items now? Lockhart's smile widened. Simple. I just need a bit of privacy and some assistance. Once the items are out, we can distribute them and make our move. Rodolphus nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. All right, we'll give you the privacy you need. But remember, Lockhart, if you're lying to us, there will be consequences. Lockhart's eyes gleamed with confidence. I assure you, I'm not lying. The Dark Lord's plan is flawless, and soon we will all be free. The Death Eaters quickly organized themselves, ensuring that Lockhart had the privacy he required. As they waited, the tension in the air was palpable. Each of them was filled with a renewed sense of hope and determination. The thought of escaping Azkaban and rejoining their master was a powerful motivator. After what felt like an eternity, Lockhart emerged, holding several small, intricately designed objects. Here they are, he announced, his voice filled with triumph. These will protect us from the Dementors and allow us to regain our strength. The Death Eaters eagerly took the items, examining them with a mix of curiosity and reverence. Bella looked at Lockhart with newfound respect. You did well, Lockhart. Now, let's put these to use and get out of here. With the magical items in their possession, the Death Eaters felt a surge of energy and confidence. They knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but with the Dark Lord's plan and Lockhart's cunning, they believed they could overcome any obstacle. As they prepared for their escape, the thought of freedom and vengeance fueled their resolve. Azkaban's walls, which had once seemed impenetrable, now felt like mere barriers waiting to be shattered. The Death Eaters were ready to reclaim their place in the wizarding world, and nothing would stand in their way. Rodolphus's eyes suddenly lit up as if he had an epiphany, but his expression quickly turned peculiar, and the corners of his mouth twitched stiffly. The props you have hidden on your body, are they? Down there? Rodolphus asked Lockhart tentatively. Lockhart's eyes met Rodolph's, and it was as if he had found a kindred spirit. The stiff smile on his face softened, and tears glistened faintly at the corners of his eyes. Down there? What do you mean? Bella asked, puzzled. Rodolphus pointed cryptically towards his lower abdomen. Are you talking about the anus? Bella's eyes widened in shock, and she covered her mouth, looking as if she might vomit. Even this once high-spirited dark wizard couldn't accept the truth so easily. You hid all 17 props. In that place? How did you manage? Why didn't you tell us earlier? Rodolph's curiosity overshadowed Bella's nausea. He was more interested in how Lockhart had survived until now. For more than half a month, Lockhart had not been affected by the Dementors, which meant that for over 10 days, those alchemical props had been hidden inside his body. But this was completely unnecessary. Wouldn't it have been less painful if he had told everyone earlier? It's easy to say, Lockhart replied with a wry smile. What do you think I've been busy with for more than half a month? It wasn't until yesterday that I finally removed the 16th amulet. Otherwise, I wouldn't have chosen to connect with you in these past 2 days, Lockhart explained, his expression serious. But soon, another twitch in his stomach made him grimace. However, his face quickly lit up with joy. Ha! It's been hard to maintain this position for so long, but the last treasure will be born today. With that, Lockhart rushed to the corner of the cell. Moments later, everyone outside the cell heard a sound like firecrackers, accompanied by a foul stench. End of this chapter. Chapter 837, installing the amulet. For a moment, the felons in the cells on the entire floor stared in the direction of Lockhart's cell in stunned amazement, listening to the sounds of his struggle. After a while, Lockhart, with great effort, managed to reach the cell door, holding a pile of grape-sized metal beads in his hand. Finally, Lockhart pushed the beads forward. The task entrusted by the Dark Lord is complete. Now it's up to you. With that, Lockhart passed the handful of beads to Bella in the next cell. Bella, known for her fearlessness and boldness, couldn't help but twitch at the sight of the smelly objects, a hint of fear crossing her expression. What is this? Bella roared internally, unable to comprehend why she had to do such a thing in such a place. Escape from prison with a pile of filth? Is this a joke? Don't delay, Lockhart urged Bella when he saw her hesitation. Hurry up! Are you going to betray the Dark Lord? This is specially prepared by him to save you. Betrayal? No, never. I will never betray my master. Bella was shocked by his words and immediately shook her head violently. She mustered up the courage, swallowed hard, and took the wet, sticky, and smelly objects with trembling hands. How do you use this? Bella asked, holding her breath, ready to go all out. It's simple. Hide it in your body like I did, and the Dementors won't be able to absorb your souls. Lockhart explained, putting on a righteous expression. I have entrusted all the amulets to you. Don't disappoint the Dark Lord and my efforts. Bella swallowed again, unsure if she fully understood Lockhart's words, but she obediently distributed the amulets to the other Death Eaters. The open design of the cells in Azkaban, meant to allow the Dementors to feed easily, facilitated this distribution. The doors and outer walls were made of hard metal fences, unlike closed cells with only a small gap for communication. Each Death Eater received a metal bead and stared at it in silence, unsure how to react. The treatment of prisoners in Azkaban was notoriously bad, with a fixed and rationed daily water supply, making it impossible to clean the amulets. Did they really have to use a part of Lockhart's body? The thought made Rodolphus's stomach churn, and he felt increasingly nauseous. In the end, Bella, the most loyal to Voldemort, made up her mind first. For the Master, for the glory of the Death Eaters and the Dark Lord, I will go all out. Bella shouted, then resolutely put the hand holding the metal bead into her pants. After a moment, her expression changed from struggling to relaxed, as if she had passed a thrilling test. Seeing Bella take the lead, the rest of the Death Eaters followed suit, using the amulet Lockhart had brought in. They wore grim, tangled, painful, or even comfortable expressions as they inserted the objects. From a distance, Lockhart watched the scene with a sense of satisfaction. He recalled the time when Anduin had forced him to stuff steel balls into his body and felt a sense of vindication. Now, seeing others endure the same pain he had suffered, he couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of pleasure. As for why Anduin had asked him to help these Death Eaters escape, Lockhart didn't dare to ask or even think about it. After several months of contact, he had learned not to question the other party's orders. Even if Anduin had prepared him to deceive this horde of vicious Death Eaters, he was still apprehensive. After the Death Eaters equipped themselves with the amulets, they fell into a moment of confusion. They hadn't even tested the function of these items, so why did they equip them so obediently? However, the opportunity for verification soon came. It turned out that this meeting coincided with a new round of Dementor patrols. Several cloaked monsters, floating in the air like ghosts, slowly drifted down the corridor. Every time they passed a cage, they would put their heads next to the fence, open their mouths, and start sucking. For these Dementors, the food provided by the prisoners in Azkaban was getting worse and worse. How could these prisoners have many happy memories left in their minds? It was deadly dull, so every time they sucked, they could only fill up halfway. Today's patrol was even less effective than before. The Dementors found that they had been sucking in front of most of the prison doors for a long time, but couldn't extract a trace of memory or soul. However, these creatures, with their worrying IQ, did not realize that the prisoners were using alchemy props to block their inhalation. They just wondered if the souls in these prisoners had already been sucked dry. After a big puff, the Dementors left the floor, roaring with discontent, like underfed employees cursing and yelling. After experiencing the Dementor's patrol, the Death Eaters gathered in front of the prison door, their faces full of surprise. "It actually works," Rodolphus cheered, filled with surprise. "Those Dementors failed to suck any magic power from me." "Me too. The amulet bestowed by the Master is truly amazing." "Long live the Dark Lord. Long live the Death Eaters." After truly experiencing the efficacy of the alchemy props, everyone cheered. They even attributed this miracle to Voldemort and forgot the embarrassment of wearing the props. At this moment, Lockhart looked at the scene with a slightly pale face. After taking out all the amulets from his body, he lost the ability to resist the Dementors. Of course, the monitor deployed by Anduin in his body could resist some Dementors, but its function was not so complete. Lockhart still felt weak for a while. Seeing the change in Lockhart, the Death Eaters on the opposite side nodded. They now had 100% trust in this man, known as the new servant of the Dark Lord. Not only had he taken great pains to bring the sharp weapon that helped them escape into Azkaban, but he also disregarded his own safety to fulfill the Dark Lord's entrustment. "O loyal minister, Lockhart, we will never forget your contribution. You have to hold on for 2 more days. After my recovery is complete, I will definitely take you away with me. Don't worry. Even if I don't have a wand in my hand, I can still perform apparition," Rodolphus said confidently, patting Lockhart's chest. But at this moment, Lockhart secretly cursed in his heart. "Who the hell wants to go out with you? I don't want to die yet." "No, just take care of your own safety because you have more important tasks on your shoulders," Lockhart refused righteously. "The Dark Lord is in a very difficult situation now. The Ministry of Magic will definitely issue a reward after everyone escapes from prison, and I am too famous in every country. If I escape with you, it will be easy to expose my whereabouts." Seeing Lockhart's loyalty, Rodolphus, who had never been sympathetic to others, felt a little embarrassed. "But if the Master sees us escaping without you, he will definitely blame us." "Hey," Lockhart gave a wry smile. "Every time the Dark Lord wakes up from near death, he loses part of his memory. It's hard to say if he will even remember this." Lockhart took a deep breath and addressed the group. "If you truly want to repay me, then please, escape one by one. Don't let my efforts be in vain." The Death Eaters nodded slowly, their expressions a mix of reluctance and resignation. They were not accustomed to considering others, but Lockhart's words left them with little choice. Bella, standing nearby, interrupted the silence. "Lockhart, besides asking you to bring things in, did the Master tell you anything else? How are we supposed to find him once we get out?" she asked, her voice tinged with urgency. Lockhart met her gaze, his expression serious. "After you escape, head to Albania and hide in the southern forest. The Dark Lord can sense your dark mark within a certain range, and he will find you when the time comes." He paused, ensuring they understood the gravity of his next words. "Remember, once you're out, do not act rashly or cause trouble. The wizarding world is much harsher now than it was 10 years ago. Any misstep could attract the attention of the Ministry of Magic, and they will come after you." Lockhart's tone grew even more severe. "Also, after you escape, go abroad immediately. Do not return to the UK or even get close to it. There are dangers everywhere, and any carelessness will bring disaster upon you." Rodolphus exchanged a skeptical glance with the others. "Is it really that bad?" he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. They had once been fearless, indulging in violence and chaos without a second thought. The idea of restraining themselves now seemed almost laughable. Lockhart's expression softened slightly, understanding their disbelief. "Yes, it is. The world has changed, and you must adapt if you want to survive." The room fell silent, the weight of Lockhart's words sinking in. The Death Eaters knew they had no choice but to heed his warnings if they wanted to regain their freedom and avoid immediate capture. "I apologize for the delay in updates. I had a re-examination yesterday and had to spend the day at the hospital. I've been quite weak lately and need to return for checkups every few days. Sometimes I even have to be hospitalized for further examination. It may take a few days to fully recover, but I promise to make up for the missing chapters as soon as I can. Thank you for your understanding." End of this chapter. Chapter 838, The Sudden Fear Curse. "It's up to you to believe it or not," Lockhart sneered. You may not know that the entire wizarding world, especially the areas dominated by Britain, France, and Germany, have been fortified by Anduin's silver flash. The business house has been turned into an impenetrable fortress. Anyone who dares to cause trouble in this area will be struck down immediately. You probably haven't seen the scene where aurors arrive within 5 minutes of a spell being cast. What you're saying is too outrageous, isn't it? Not only Rodolphus, but the rest of the Death Eaters, including Bella, showed disdainful expressions. They were seasoned criminals, each with several lives on their hands. Many years ago, whether they were attacking wizards or muggles, it was considered extremely efficient if the Ministry of Magic arrived within an hour. Therefore, what Lockhart said sounded like myths and legends to them, too bizarre to believe. Although this Lockhart is loyal to his master, he is not without flaws, and he likes to brag, Rodolphus thought, shaking his head secretly. He didn't believe it, but since Lockhart had helped them a lot just now, he didn't bother to expose him. Seeing the reactions of the Death Eaters, Lockhart felt helpless. He had finally told the truth to these guys, but they didn't believe him. After that, the Death Eaters stopped talking to Lockhart and began discussing loudly how to escape from prison, including the time and route of their actions. Although Azkaban was heavily guarded, the guards were seriously insufficient, so they discussed their plans openly without worrying about being discovered. However, just because the prison guards couldn't find out didn't mean these secrets were only circulated among the Death Eaters. Not only Death Eaters were locked up on this floor. Just when Rodolphus, Bella, and the others were finalizing the details, a dry, dirty hand suddenly stretched out from a nearby cell and a hoarse voice spoke. "Rodolphus, when you escape from prison, take me with you too." "Why?" Rodolphus sneered. The prisoner next door had been in Azkaban longer than him, but despite being neighbors for so long, he didn't even know the man's name. All he knew was that this man was a godlike figure who always muttered to himself in a corner. There had never been any interaction between them. It was no wonder Rodolphus was skeptical of his request. After suffering so many years of torture in Azkaban, the state of the Death Eaters was extremely poor. Even after a few days of recovery and regaining a little magic power, it didn't mean they could return to their full strength. Their magic power and physical strength had been severely diminished, and it would take time to recover fully. But they were preparing for a violent escape, planning to break through the confinement of their cells and rush to the top platform where they could apparate to escape. They would have to cast spells without wands, and the consumption of magic for wandless apparition was significant. They might not be able to transfer to a safe area in one step. So they couldn't even take care of themselves, let alone bring along another cripple with no combat effectiveness. The man was not a hero like Lockhart. "If you don't help me, I'll expose all your plans when the aurors are on patrol tomorrow." The wizard's hoarse voice carried a hint of murderous intent, making no effort to hide his threat. It was clear that he was not a kind person. "Just because you want to threaten me, the magic power I have recovered is enough to deal with you," Rodolphus growled, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Kill you by this time tomorrow. If you think it will take too long, just say it, or shut up." Rodolphus didn't care about the other party's threat. Even if the wizard truly intended to kill, how could the wizards imprisoned here show any mercy? After realizing that his threat was ineffective, the wizard didn't mind Rodolphus's murderous aura. Instead, he immediately changed his demeanor and smiled. "Rodolphus, don't be so anxious. I didn't ask you to save me for nothing. I will naturally have enough to thank you after I escape from prison." You'd better stop talking nonsense, as if someone is short of money." Rodolphus curled his lips in disdain. As a member of a pure-blood family, he was very wealthy and had been accustomed to seeing galleons, potions, and treasures since childhood. The reason Rodolphus joined the Death Eaters was not because of the grand vision the Dark Lord painted for them. What they wanted was to rule the wizarding world, not just material wealth. Heh! The wizard didn't care about Rodolphus's dismissive words and continued, "I know you don't care about material things, but what about real power? The power that can make you invincible and even help your master become stronger." "Presumptuous," Rodolphus cursed viciously. In his mind, the Dark Lord was already an invincible existence, his strength unparalleled. The wizard's words sounded like mockery, which made Rodolphus furious. "Oh, you don't think the so-called Dark Lord is invincible, do you?" The wizard next door seemed to read Rodolphus's thoughts and sneered. "If that's the case, how could he be defeated, his soul captured, and even his Horcruxes destroyed? You're courting death." Rodolphus glared at the withered hand extended by the other party. If he hadn't just pressed the amulet and lacked sufficient magic power, he would have killed the wizard on the spot. "Don't deny it, and don't be stubborn. There is no absolutely invincible existence in the wizarding world. Even if there is, only I know of one. I'm afraid your Dark Lord falls short." The wizard next door continued, unfazed by Rodolphus's anger. Rodolphus sneered. If the wizard had only slightly offended him before, now he was truly seeking death by daring to belittle his master. As for the invincible existence the wizard mentioned, Rodolphus looked at the withered hands in front of him as if he were looking at a dead man, and joked, "Oh, you actually know someone stronger than my master? Tell me." In fact, Rodolphus had already made up his mind to kill the wizard completely when he escaped from prison. This conversation was like talking to a dead man in advance, devoid of any real anger in his tone. The wizard next door didn't seem to notice the change in Rodolphus's tone and continued to boast, which surprised Rodolphus. "Have you ever heard of the despicable Hypor?" asked the wizard next door. "Despicable Hypor? That dark wizard from thousands of years ago? Don't tell me the invincible being you mentioned is him," Rodolphus said. "That's right." The wizard's voice suddenly became high-pitched but remained low in volume. "What I want to tell you today is this big secret. Hypor is still alive." Really? Rodolphus obviously didn't believe it. The old guy next door seemed no different from a lunatic in his mind. "Don't dismiss it. You know he was the first dark wizard to invent a Horcrux," the wizard next door said in a low voice. "It's not surprising that he could live for so long." Rodolphus frowned slightly. The fact that the wizard knew about the origin of the Horcrux made this story more plausible. After all, although they discussed the Horcrux in public just now, they did not mention its origin. Even if what you said is true, so what? Do you still know Hierbo? Rodolphus asked with some doubt. "You guessed it right. I did have brief contact with Hierbo since I was marked by him." When the wizard next door said this, his voice suddenly became messy and hurried. His withered hands tensed involuntarily, as if he was suffering some kind of pain. "Hey, hey!" Rodolphus heard the other party's sudden restraint and couldn't help asking repeatedly, clearly intrigued by the wizard's words. "Don't, The wizard next door seemed to have violated some terrible taboo, and his whole body collapsed in pain. Not long after, his exposed arm began to emit a layer of faint black smoke, accompanied by a frightening wave of magic. This wave of fluctuations continued to spread and reverberate through the prison. Whether it was the Death Eaters or the rest of the Dark Wizards, they felt as if their hearts had been slammed by cascades of dreadful affairs. Is this the fear curse? Due to the proximity, Rodolphus was immediately affected by this magic. Fortunately, he was strong and his willpower was firm, so he broke free from the illusion in just a few seconds. Of course, this had something to do with his current weakened state. If he were in his prime, he wouldn't even be affected by this level of fear curse. But even so, Rodolphus was taken aback by what had just happened. As the former head of the Lestrange family, he naturally knew that the magic emerging from the wizard next door was the fear curse. He also knew how difficult this spell was to master and how much mana it took to cast it. An ordinary adult wizard couldn't even cast it. Even a powerful dark wizard would expend a lot to cast a spell that could affect such a large area. But the guy next door was now staying in Azkaban like them. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be a trace of magic power left in his body, so how did he cast this spell? Rodolphus's expression changed drastically as he began to believe what the other party said. He hurriedly asked, Hey, how are you doing now?" "Huh." After a few seconds, there was a voice of relaxation from the next door, and at the same time, the fear spell that was constantly cast outside slowly stopped. "I don't call you hey, I'm Boris Ivanovich." Boris, who had regained his composure, sounded extremely weak. His tone was different from before, as if his mental state had improved significantly. He no longer sounded like a lunatic. "You haven't finished what you just said. Hirebo, what next?" Rodolphus was relieved to see that the other party had returned to normal and urged him to continue talking. To show respect, he didn't even ask about the fear spell just now. Being able to cast a spell in the heavily guarded Azkaban was not a trivial matter, and he expected that the other party would not tell him easily. "I can't tell you too much." Boris's voice was full of pain. "I can't talk about that existence, and I advise you not to ask too much. Didn't you feel the punishment just now?" "What? You mean it was the punishment imposed by that existence?" Rodolphus was even more surprised. If the other party said that, wouldn't it represent the fear curse just now? "I really can't say any more." Boris gasped for breath. "You just need to remember that if you can save me, I can connect you, even the Dark Lord you obey, with that existence. When the time comes, powerful power, treasures, and even rights will all be at your fingertips. There will even be a real means of immortality. I'm afraid you don't know it, but even Horcruxes have higher-end means of use." Boris uttered these words as if he were being held underwater, struggling to get them out. Rodolphus let out a sigh of relief, as if merely voicing his thoughts had lifted a heavy burden from his shoulders. He seemed desperate for freedom, speaking with urgency to ensure that the bait he dangled was enough to compel Rodolphus to rescue him. Hearing Boris's plea, Rodolphus felt a pang of empathy for the suffering man. He stopped speaking and fell into deep thought. The idea of rescuing Boris was no longer as unthinkable as it had been moments before. The fear curse that Boris had demonstrated was convincing enough to lend credibility to his words. Now, Rodolphus was weighing the pros and cons of the rescue. Boris was not a member of the Death Eaters, and there was no guarantee he would honor any agreement once freed. The risks involved in aiding his escape were significant, and there was a chance they could be caught, making it impossible for Rodolphus to get away. However, the mention of the Horcrux had piqued Rodolphus's interest. "If what Boris says is true," Rodolphus thought, "and if I can successfully extract him, presenting him to the Dark Lord could bring the Death Eaters close, to regaining their pureblood glory. It could also earn me the Master's favor. This gamble might just be worth taking." End of this chapter. Chapter 839, Jailbreak. "Okay, I promise you," Rodolphus replied to Boris with determination. Despite suspecting that Boris might be deceiving him, Rodolphus decided to take the risk. This could potentially advance the Dark Lord's plans and strengthen the Death Eater's power. Rodolphus was no ordinary thug within the Death Eater's ranks. He and Bellatrix Lestrange were among Voldemort's most loyal followers and held high-ranking positions. In Voldemort's absence, Rodolphus could assume leadership, directing other Death Eaters. Thus, he was now thinking from a leader's perspective. With Lockhart's help, he believed their escape was feasible. However, the challenge lay in the Death Eater's ability to regroup and regain strength after the escape. According to Lockhart, even Voldemort had been driven out of England by a man named Anduin. Although Rodolphus was skeptical about Lockhart's claims regarding the heavily guarded British wizarding world, he knew they couldn't remain there. The Death Eaters needed to replenish their ranks, especially with capable individuals. Even if Boris couldn't directly aid the Dark Lord, he could still serve as a useful asset. Rodolphus considered rescuing more serious criminals, but dismissed the idea, knowing that few of them were reliable, and Voldemort's current state was precarious. The recent vision had caused panic among the prisoners on their floor, but fortunately, only those in the cells opposite Rodolphus and Boris knew what had happened. The Death Eaters in the opposite cell remained silent under Rodolphus's signal, and the commotion gradually subsided. In the following days, the Death Eaters lived quietly, hiding their strengths and biding their time. They behaved as usual, but secretly accumulated their magic. It was a struggle to persevere, as the so-called talisman had held them in that strange place for days, causing significant discomfort. After 5 more days, the Death Eaters finally replenished their magic, though their mental and physical conditions were still poor due to the talisman's influence. Some had even suffered from constipation for 5 or 6 days, adding to their misery. Once their magic was nearly restored, They decided to act quickly, fearing further delay would cripple them. That afternoon, the Death Eaters gathered near the fence, waiting for the patrolling wizard. They planned to seize a wand immediately upon escape, making it easier to flee. They knew there were only 4 Aurors guarding Azkaban. Capturing one would not only provide a hostage, but also reduce the guard's strength. Soon, they heard the clack-clack of footsteps at the corridor's end. The Death Eaters recognized this as the only sorceress among the Azkaban guards, identifiable by her high heels. Umbridge, wearing high heels and her signature pink uniform, hurried through the corridor. She glanced into the cells casually, ensuring the prisoners were neither dead nor sick, and quickly moved on. Her eyes were filled with contempt, and she even raised her nose when passing certain cells. Umbridge raised her hand to cover her nose, clearly repulsed by the stench. The prisoners in the cell, already annoyed by her presence, glared at her with disdain. Today, however, they were unusually quiet, leaning against the fence and staring at her with strange intensity. Umbridge, eager to end this meaningless patrol and leave the filthy place, didn't think much of it. She couldn't fathom why she had been sent to Azkaban. Was it because she had offended Anduin? Ever since her demotion by Fudge, the rest of the Ministry of Magic had treated her like a pariah. No amount of flattery could regain the trust of Fudge and the other directors. Her situation had deteriorated, her position becoming increasingly marginal until she was finally assigned to Azkaban, as if they wanted to get rid of her. How could an alchemy firm owner overshadow the Ministry of Magic? That Anduin is so narrow-minded. Umbridge muttered as she continued her patrol. She had disliked Anduin for a long time, ever since he had scolded her when she tried to speak on behalf of Yulia from the Tefras family over a decade ago. Anduin, only 13 at the time, had rebuffed her harshly. Since then, Umbridge had been at odds with him. No one had expected the young wizard to rise to such prominence, becoming a household name in the wizarding world. Those who offended him didn't even need Anduin to act. Others would take care of it for him. Umbridge's face twisted with bitterness as she wondered if she should let go of the past and find a way to appease Anduin, hoping it might lead to her transfer back to the Ministry of Magic. Lost in thought, she suddenly noticed something odd. Her shadow seemed longer than it should be. She stopped abruptly and turned around, her face filled with confusion. What she saw made her freeze as if struck by lightning. Less than a meter away stood a burly wizard with a sinister smile, his cold eyes fixed on her. "What's going on in that idiot mind of yours? You don't even look around when you're walking." Rodolphus sneered, suddenly grabbing Umbridge's neck and casting a Cruciatus curse with a silent, wandless spell. "Oh, this is easier than I expected." Rodolphus chuckled, drawing Umbridge's wand. He hadn't anticipated encountering such a useless Auror. Using transfiguration, he had twisted the fence and broken out of his cell after she passed by. He was astonished by her lack of vigilance. She hadn't even noticed him until he was right behind her. In her fear, she had forgotten to draw her wand, making her an easy target. With this almost perfect start, Rodolphus felt a surge of confidence. Meanwhile, the other Death Eaters used transfiguration and impact curses to break out of their cells. These were no ordinary criminals. They were proficient in wandless and silent spellcasting, easily breaking through the enchanted prison doors. Throwing Umbridge into Bellatrix's hands, Rodolphus said coldly, "Take care of her." This guy will be our hostage next. If you are surrounded by other guards, use her as a shield," Bella instructed, her voice dripping with malice. "GJ!" Bella stroked the trembling Umbridge as if she were a mere plaything. "Be good, otherwise you will suffer later." You, how is this possible?" Umbridge stammered, completely terrified. She couldn't comprehend how these Death Eaters had suddenly gained the power to escape. Her mind raced, but no answers came. The Death Eaters paid no attention to Umbridge. To them, the pink toad was already half dead, her only use being a tool to facilitate their escape. "Rodolphus, don't forget our agreement," Boris called out, reminding them of their deal as the Death Eaters made their way out of the cell. "I won't forget you," Rodolphus sneered, approaching Boris's room. "But if I find out you dared to deceive me, don't blame me for being rude." Without hesitation, Rodolphus extended his wand and cast a spell on the door. The cell fence transformed into ooze under the effect of the transfiguration. Once Boris was freed, Rodolphus assigned a Death Eater to guard him and gathered everyone to break through to the upper floor. The sudden appearance of Death Eaters in the prison corridor naturally attracted the attention of the Dementor guards. Seeing the crowd, the Dementors rushed over, their teeth bared and claws extended. However, the Death Eaters remained calm. They knew the Dementors couldn't harm them because they were all equipped with protective amulets. The Dementors tried to suck the life out of the wizards, but it had no effect. Frustrated, they could only watch as the Death Eaters rushed past them. The scene that followed was almost comical. The Dementors, with their limited intelligence, were unsure whether to chase after the escapees, warn the guards on the upper level, or stick to their posts and continue patrolling. End of this chapter. Chapter 840. The Black Pot. The Death Eaters took advantage of the Dementors' distraction, slipping through their defensive circle and advancing to the upper floors. The Dementors they encountered were active and tried to halt their progress, but the protection of the amulets rendered them ineffective. At this moment, Azkaban seemed like an empty room to the Death Eaters, who ignored all guards except the Aurors. Meanwhile, the three remaining Aurors were lounging in a room adjacent to the passage leading to the top floor. They were enjoying a bonfire and sipping hot tea leisurely. Their work in Azkaban was generally easy, involving a daily patrol to check for emergencies and reporting to the Ministry of Magic headquarters. If the prisoners were not causing trouble or falling ill, the Aurors could spend their days in relative peace. At this particular moment, the Aurors were in high spirits because Umbridge, the most annoying among them, was on patrol duty. This gave them a reprieve from her incessant nagging. They were contentedly playing Thunderbolt, enjoying the quiet. Suddenly, loud shouting erupted from outside the room. It sounded like the prisoners were causing a commotion. "What are those prisoners screaming about? Slim, why don't you go check it out?" one Auror, Basque, said with a frown. "Why don't you go?" Slim retorted, rolling his eyes. He glanced at the clock and muttered, "Umbridge should be back from patrol by now. Maybe she's making sarcastic remarks to the prisoners again, making them unhappy." "That wouldn't cause such a big commotion," Basque replied, frowning even more. "It sounds like the entire floor is screaming. Do you think something happened?" "What could possibly happen? Do you think someone escaped from prison?" "The Dementors would have stopped them," Slim said dismissively. However, the noise outside was growing louder, so he reluctantly stood up, opened the door, and poked his head out. Their lounge was in the same corridor as the cells on the first floor, so Slim could see the entire corridor clearly. What he saw left him stunned. A group of more than a dozen Death Eaters, led by Rodolphus and Bellatrix Lestrange, was rushing towards him. Bellatrix was holding a pale-faced Umbridge hostage. Behind the Death Eaters, a row of Dementors was chasing them, their mouths open as they tried to suck the life out of the Death Eaters. However, the amulets protected the Death Eaters, making the Dementors' efforts futile. On both sides of the corridor, prisoners were gathered at the fences. Some were exclaiming in surprise, having never seen anyone escape from Azkaban. Others were booing, and a few were even begging the Death Eaters to rescue them. The prisoners on this level had relatively short sentences, so many were shouting at Slim and the other guards, hoping to get out early by commuting their sentences. However, the noise was so overwhelming that Slim and the others couldn't hear the warnings clearly. As Slim stood there, frozen in shock, the Death Eaters continued their advance, and the chaos in Azkaban reached a fever pitch. "A prisoner has escaped from prison." Slim shouted urgently into the room after recognizing the group of Death Eaters. His initial shock quickly turned into panic. The other two guards in the room, however, did not react immediately. Azkaban had been peaceful for centuries, and the idea of a prison break was almost inconceivable to them. Unlike the Aurors at headquarters who frequently trained and faced various tasks, these guards had grown complacent, their sense of crisis dulled by years of routine. The advancing Death Eaters, however, were not about to give them time to prepare. Their nerves were taut, and they immediately launched a volley of spells at Slim. All Petrificus Totalis, Reducto, Incarcerus. In the blink of an eye, 5 or 6 spells were hurled at Slim. Fortunately, although the Death Eaters could cast spells without wands, their accuracy suffered. Only a few spells connected, but it was enough to startle Slim and drive him back into the room. The Death Eaters did not continue their assault. Their primary objective was to escape, conserving their magic for the journey ahead. They refrained from using any high-energy black magic. "What's happening outside?" one of the other Aurors asked, now fully alert after seeing Slim retreat. "There are wizards who have escaped from prison, many of them, at least a dozen, and they've taken Umbridge hostage. If I saw correctly, the leaders are Rodolphus and Bellatrix," Slim explained hurriedly, his voice trembling with fear. "How do they still have the magic power to cast spells? What are those Dementors doing?" Basque, one of the guards, was furious. It wasn't just one or two prisoners, it was a whole group. "What should we do now? We can't win against more than 10 wizards, especially with Umbridge as their hostage," the last Auror said, overwhelmed by the situation. "We can't just let them leave," Slim said through gritted teeth. "If we do, the Ministry of Magic will hold us responsible. We could be accused of negligence or even complicity in the escape." The escape of more than a dozen wizards suggested an organized effort, possibly with inside help. Azkaban's security was supposed to be impenetrable, especially with the Dementors. Why had they suddenly become ineffective? "But Umbridge is still in their hands," Basque pointed out, his wand already drawn but his face conflicted. "We don't have time to worry about her now," Slim replied urgently. "If Umbridge gets hurt, it will be seen as her sacrifice in the fight against evil. We need to focus on stopping these prisoners. Who knows if Umbridge had anything to do with their escape?" Slim's suspicions were not unfounded. Umbridge had only recently been transferred to Azkaban, while the other 3 guards had been there for years, some for over a decade. The timing was suspicious, and Slim's words hung heavily in the air. The other 2 were convinced without a single rebuttal. In fact, the darker sides of their hearts even entertained the thought that, regardless of whether they could prevent the criminals from escaping, they might be able to blame Umbridge for the failure. "All right," the last Auror, Calvo, responded. He then added, "Basque, alert headquarters immediately. Slim and I will try to stop these criminals." The 2 nodded in agreement. Basque quickly took out a magical communicator and dialed the number for the Auror command. Fortunately, Azkaban's location in the North Sea, between the UK and Northern Europe, was covered by the Nordic magic net recently established by the Silver Flash Trading Company. This made it possible for them to contact headquarters without difficulty. As soon as the connection was made, Basque shouted urgently, "Level 10 alert! Level 10 alert! At least 10 high-security prisoners have escaped from Azkaban and are attacking the entrance to the top floor. We are doing our best to block them, requesting immediate support." Basque repeated the message several times. The operator on the other end reacted swiftly, sounding the alarm throughout the headquarters. The alert was quickly converted into a text message and sent to all active Aurors. Simultaneously, emergency communications were made to the director of the Law Enforcement Department, the chief of the Auror Command, and the Minister of Magic. Clearly, these operators were well trained for such emergencies. Meanwhile, Slim and Calvo exchanged determined glances before resolutely pushing open the door. They rushed out side by side, casting spells down the corridor without hesitation. Thunderbolt explosion? Burning flames? The 2 Aurors didn't consider Umbridge's safety at all, nor did they care if their spells would be lethal. Their first attacks were ruthless, large-scale spells. At that moment, the Death Eaters were about 10 meters away from Slim's restroom, nearing the exit and ready to escape. They were on high alert. The Death Eaters reacted quickly to the sudden attack, but they hadn't anticipated such a fierce and reckless offensive from the Aurors, especially with a hostage in their hands. All protection. Rodolphus, who was holding a wand, stepped forward and cast a wide-range protection spell to block the attacks. Using Umbridge as a shield was out of the question. "My condition seems to be recurring, and my body temperature is rising again. It's driving me crazy. The hospital still hasn't found the cause, so I can only observe at home. Hopefully, things will improve once the cause is identified, but I will try to update as much as possible every day." End of this chapter. Chapter 841, Quick Response. The moment Slim and Calvo confronted Rodolphus, the battle between the two sides officially began. It was a lopsided fight, 17 Death Eaters against just 2 Aurors. The fighting distance was only about 10 meters. Even though these Death Eaters hadn't cast a spell in over 10 years and didn't have wands, the Aurors stationed in Azkaban rarely had chances to fight either. Expecting Slim and Calvo to suddenly show their power was a bit of a dream. If the Auror guards had reacted earlier and carried out an orderly blockade in advance, the outcome might not have been so disastrous. But with a distance of more than 10 meters, those Death Eaters could still cause significant damage even with rudimentary spells. Therefore, there was no suspense in this sudden encounter. After only one clash, the 2 Aurors were forced back into the room by overwhelming spells. Calvo, who moved slowly, was even hit by a spell, causing a gash on his right shoulder. "No, we can't hold them off at all." Slim hurriedly closed the metal door and leaned his body against it. His primary concern now was not whether he could prevent the Death Eaters from escaping, but whether they would suffer brutally at their hands. After all, this door, even if made of thick metal and enchanted with protective spells, would not withstand the enemy's destruction for long. Basque, who had just reported the incident to the Ministry of Magic, was shocked when Slim and Calvo were beaten back. He didn't have time to think about anything else and focused on tending to the injured Calvo. What happened next was left to fate. Contrary to Slim's worries, they were not attacked by the Death Eaters. The voices outside the door gradually became quieter. "Don't they have the idea of killing us? Have they all run away?" Slim muttered to himself. After several seconds of silence, he boldly opened the door and glanced outside. He confirmed that the Death Eaters had not lingered or pursued them, but had fled without a trace. "How is it?" Basque, who was taking care of the wounded, turned his head. He also wanted to know the situation outside. Slim shook his head. "There's no one left. I guess they are heading to the uppermost floor along the passage." "So, they didn't think about dealing with us at all," Basque said, his expression serious. "It seems these guys were well prepared. Otherwise, their operation wouldn't have been so efficient." As the two were talking, a sudden noise came from the corridor leading to the upper floor, scaring Slim into quickly closing the door, thinking the Death Eaters had returned. But soon, they heard a familiar voice, belonging to Scrimgeour, the current head of the Auror Command of the Law Enforcement Division. "Slim, Basque, Calvo, Umbridge, where the hell are you guys?" Hearing this, Slim quickly opened the door and saw more than a dozen Aurors in full armor leaning against the wall on high alert, with Scrimgeour standing boldly in the middle of the corridor, shouting loudly, "Captain!" Although Slim and the others were Azkaban guards, they were theoretically affiliated with the Department of Law Enforcement, so they addressed Scrimgeour as usual. "What about those fugitives? Didn't you report that a large number of prisoners had escaped?" Scrimgeour demanded, seeing the empty corridor and Slim, who was unscathed after opening the door. He grabbed Slim by the neck, clearly agitated. Scrimgeour thought that Slim and the others had reported to the false police earlier. Otherwise, why would the world still look peaceful here? It's not really Scrimgeour's fault for overthinking this. The confrontation between Slim and the Death Eaters was just a split second, and they threw a dozen or 20 spells at each other, without even causing much damage to the scene. In addition, the environment in Azkaban was already dilapidated, and no one could see that a battle had just erupted here. "Captain, those fugitives probably escaped from the upper floors with apparition," Slim reported to Scrimgeour with a bitter face and a trembling voice. "What? Already ran away? What are you guys doing for food? Are you all trash?" Scrimgeour glared at Slim angrily. It's no wonder he was so angry. After Anduin's years of training, the response time of the Auror Command was very fast. It took them less than 5 minutes from receiving the alarm to rushing to the scene. This is because Azkaban is not in the UK and the distance is too far. The result? In such a short time, Slim and the other guards managed to let all the prisoners escape. Doesn't it mean that they just passed by the fugitives? Wouldn't everyone be pissed off in exchange for this? In addition to Slim's unscathed appearance, Scrimgeour was even more annoyed. These guards could not escape at least one charge of dereliction of duty. However, Scrimgeour quickly restrained the anger in his heart. Since the prisoner had just escaped, the most important thing now was to seize the time and pursue them with all possible means. In that case, there might be a chance to intercept them. What happened? Make it quick, Scrimgeour demanded with a dark face. Yes, Captain. Slim, trembling, recounted everything that had happened. Of course, he wasn't entirely honest and didn't explain all the details clearly. After all, from the actual situation, they only had one round of confrontation with the Death Eaters before retreating. Very rubbish. So in Slim's words, the previous battle was packaged as three people struggling to resist, but in the end, they were outnumbered, and the fugitives approached the room to hide. At this time, what was more beneficial to them was that Calvo was injured. Although his injury was not serious, the appearance of bleeding made him look very miserable, which slightly lessened Scrimgeour's resentment towards them. After listening to Slim's narration, Scrimgeour finally got a rough idea of what happened, and at the same time, he couldn't help being greatly shocked. More than a dozen fugitives escaped at the same time and did not respond to the inhalation of the Dementor. This was obviously a premeditated escape operation. Moreover, the opponent was well organized and had extremely high operational efficiency. When facing the blocking of Aurors, they were not at all reluctant to fight. As soon as they were pushed back, they escaped from the rooftop. Thinking of this, Scrimgeour's face turned green. The organized escape of so many vicious criminals might lead to catastrophe, at least a fatal blow to the reputation of the British Ministry of Magic. Mavis! Scrimgeour shouted to the side, and Mavis, who had been promoted to the vice-captain of the battering squad, leaned forward. 3 things, Scrimgeour said succinctly and sharply. First, you stay in Azkaban with 2 Auror teams, count the cells with Slim, and determine the identity of the escaped wizards. Then report to us in time. Also, speaking of which, Scrimgeour glanced at the trembling prison guard trio. Send Calvo to the Magic Injury Hospital, and at the same time, confiscate all their wands and arrange for someone to keep them under strict supervision. The expressions of the 3 guards darkened when they heard this, but they didn't show any dissatisfaction. Scrimgeour's arrangement was a normal process, and with such a major accident occurring in Azkaban, these guards could hardly be blamed, might even be accomplices of those fugitives. So, before the internal investigation was completed, they had to be monitored by the Ministry of Magic. Scrimgeour didn't take them into custody on the spot, which was considered a significant gesture of goodwill. Second, Scrimgeour continued without pausing, immediately notify the Ministry of Magic to sound the red alarm and report the detailed situation here to the minister and each director. Ensure that each director is notified. This incident will require the cooperation of all departments. More than a dozen felons escaping from Azkaban is no joke. This situation now involves more than just the Auror Command or the Department of Law Enforcement. All departments of the Ministry of Magic must work together to overcome this crisis. For example, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement needs to maximize the power of the detection and scanning circles in the alchemy room to monitor abnormal magical fluctuations throughout the UK. The Department of International Magical Cooperation must urgently contact the Ministries of Magic in other countries to inform them of the escape, as no one knows where these criminals might go. If they are not caught in time, an international arrest warrant may be issued. In short, dealing with this prison escape will be very troublesome, and all departments of the Ministry of Magic will be affected. By the way, Scrimgeour added, send a copy of the briefing to Silver Flash Trading Company and ask Mr. Wilson for help. He may have a way to find those fugitives. Third, after a brief pause, Scrimgeour continued, I will take the rest of the team back to England. Since the situation is urgent and I don't have time to return to the command post, you will send instructions to the command post for me. Order all the Aurors at headquarters to prepare for battle, cancel all vacations, and return to work immediately. Ensure smooth communication in the dispatch center. Once you find any traces of those fugitives, report to me, the directors, ministers, and Silver Flash Trading Company immediately. We must stop the criminals before they wreak havoc. Yes. Mavis nodded solemnly and then turned to arrange tasks for the 2 teams of Aurors. Scrimgeour didn't stay a moment longer and immediately left with the rest of the team in a hurry. He intended to try his luck and see if he could intercept the fugitives at the British border. Although Azkaban is located in the North Sea, it is closer to the British side. If those prisoners want to conserve their magical power, their best option is to land on the UK mainland at the nearest location and then find a way to transfer. Meanwhile, Anduin, who was researching Horcruxes in the laboratory at Godric's Hollow Manor in England, also received an emergency call from Mavis. Although Mavis hadn't been able to confirm the specific identity of the fugitives at that time, Anduin immediately understood what had happened when he heard the news. After assuring Mavis that he would fully cooperate with the Ministry of Magic to hunt down the fugitives, he excitedly closed the communicator in his hand. Beautiful, Anduin mused. I didn't expect Lockhart to look unreliable, but he was so efficient in getting things done. It took less than a month to send all those Death Eaters out. Anduin nodded in satisfaction. He had originally thought it would take a longer period for this random chess move to play a role, or even fail to work. As a result, Lockhart's prompt action made Anduin look at the old senior with newfound respect. Well, after this prison escape incident, Azkaban must be able to win smoothly. With the subsequent wanted and hunted operations, Silver Flash Trading Company will have more room to maneuver. When the time comes to operate properly, I can formulate all the security rules for the entire UK. Anduin grinned slyly. The first thing he thought of was, Anduin's motives for planning the prison escape were not entirely pure. They were driven by business matters. However, the smooth development of the plan hinges on these Death Eaters escaping successfully. Now is not the time to be blindly optimistic, Anduin muttered to himself, shaking his head. He then began to check the current locations of the Death Eaters. The talismans he had given to Lockhart were far from simple. Besides providing protection against the Dementors, their primary function was to serve as tracking devices. Unbeknownst to the Death Eaters, these talismans injected a small locator into their bodies upon contact, making their movements almost entirely transparent to Anduin. Huh? These Death Eaters are bold enough to enter the UK and even linger near the border, Anduin noted with raised eyebrows. It seems Scrimgeour will be on their trail soon. I need to find a way to assist them. With a nod, Anduin activated Apparition and vanished from his spot. Meanwhile, the Death Eaters, who had been relatively stable, encountered no significant troubles after repelling a few Auror guards. They successfully escaped from the prison rooftop, where apparition magic was not prohibited. Following Rodolphus' plan, they moved from Azkaban to the nearest British coast. Rodolphus had considered that most of them were without wands, and attempting long-distance teleportation could lead to accidents. Therefore, they planned to take advantage of the Ministry of Magic's delayed reaction to their escape. They intended to raid one or two wizard gathering places to snatch some wands, which would facilitate their subsequent actions. End of this chapter. Chapter 42, The Escape. Lockhart's previous warnings were completely ignored by the Death Eaters, including Rodolphus. None of them believed that the Ministry of Magic would respond so quickly. Even in Azkaban, the Death Eaters would not have let the remaining 3 Aurors go so easily if they hadn't been so eager for the taste of freedom. Unbeknownst to them, this haste actually bought them precious time. Had their evacuation been delayed by just a few minutes, the outcome might have been drastically different. After landing, Rodolphus ensured that everyone around him was unharmed and then led them to a certain village in northern England. This village was not a purely wizarding settlement like Hogsmeade. It was more akin to Godric's Hollow and Ottery St. Catchpole, where wizards and muggles lived together. Approximately 7 or 8 wizarding families resided there, along with a small wizarding bar and several Floo network lines. Rodolphus, Bellatrix, and the others were familiar with this place. Despite being out of touch with wizarding society for over a decade, they believed that such gathering areas would not have changed much. In their minds, the wizarding world was immutable. What it looked like today would be the same in 100 years. After their second apparition, the Death Eaters stormed towards the bar with aggressive intent. They had been holding back for more than 10 years and now finally had the opportunity to cause chaos. Boom! Kicking open the door of the bar, Rodolphus led the group inside with an air of arrogance. They were met with the sight of 3 wizards chatting at the bar and the bar owner wiping glasses behind the counter. The business seemed slow, with only a few idle residents as customers. The magical gramophone playing melodious music and the floating magic lamps gave the place a strange ambience. The old magical radio had been replaced with a light-emitting device on a tripod, projecting a Quidditch League game onto the wall. Such advancements were unfamiliar to them, but this was not the time for curiosity. Rodolphus sneered and raised his wand, pointing it at the 4 shocked faces. "Long time no see, little Billy," Rodolphus addressed the bar owner. "This dilapidated bar is really run by you, but the business doesn't look very good." Rodolphus? Little Billy stammered, recognizing the intruder. His face grew increasingly pale as he identified the others with Rodolphus. Despite the passage of more than 10 years, he could still recognize them, but it seemed impossible. They were supposed to be in Azkaban. "Run!" Little Billy, who had lived through the Dark Ages, didn't know why these Death Eaters were no longer in Azkaban or why they were here, but he was acutely aware of the danger they posed. Without hesitation, he shouted a warning and prepared to use apparition to escape. However, Rodolphus had anticipated this. Seeing Little Billy's actions, he smiled ferociously and flicked his wand forward. The apparating figures of the 4 wizards were abruptly interrupted, causing them to fall to the ground. Interrupting an apparition is extremely dangerous and can result in severe injury or even death if not done carefully. Fortunately, Little Billy and the others were not seriously harmed, but they were now at the mercy of the Death Eaters. The other patrons were all loyal customers of the Silver Glitter Trading Company, each adorned with multiple silver glitter amulets. These amulets not only provided protection in case of apparition errors, but also seemed to recognize malicious interference. Consequently, they had proactively sent an alarm to the Ministry of Magic. The effectiveness of the alchemy protection products from Silver Glitter Trading Company was becoming increasingly impressive. Besides offering various safety guarantees for the wearer, they could even report attacks to the Ministry of Magic and seek help from the hospital when injuries occurred. The functionality was quite user-friendly. Little Billy and the others felt a sense of relief upon discovering this. They had witnessed the changes in the Ministry of Magic over the past few years. Since the late Budnor era, the efficiency of the Aurors had significantly improved. Although they couldn't escape using apparition at the moment, they were confident that if they held out for a while, the Ministry of Magic's rescue would arrive soon. With this thought, the 4 of them gained a bit of confidence. They stood up, drew their wands, and faced the Death Eaters. Seeing the actions of the 4, Rodolphus, Bellatrix, and the others exchanged glances and then burst into wild laughter. As Death Eaters, they had once been so glorious. Every wizard they encountered had looked submissive and humble, but now, in a random wizard tavern, the patrons dared to raise their wands against them. "Humph, you're courting death. I originally thought that if you were sensible, I would spare your lives," Rodolphus sneered ferociously. He then waved his hand to the crowd behind him. "Show them our power! Ha-ha! To pieces!" As soon as Rodolphus finished speaking, Bellatrix, who was still gripping Umbridge's neck, took the lead and cast a spell at them. The other Death Eaters were quick to follow, laughing maniacally as they cast their spells, venting their frustration from over a decade of imprisonment. A barrage of colorful spells instantly engulfed the 4 of them, many of which were poorly aimed, covering the entire bar area. Boom! After a series of roars, a large hole was blasted in a corner of the bar. The building materials here were not as strong as those in Azkaban. However, as the smoke and dust gradually settled, the Death Eaters were stunned by the scene before them. It was not what they had imagined. Instead of 4 torn corpses lying on the ground, the 4 individuals were not only alive, but also unscathed. Several ornaments on the bodies of Little Billy and the others had lit up, forming one or several layers of magic shields that tightly wrapped around them. The Death Eaters stood in shock, realizing the formidable protection provided by the silver glitter amulets. End of this chapter.